Jennifer's not coming.
She's not going to be here? Yeah. Okay, good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to get started. The first item on the agenda is to vote to approve the draft September 14th, 2008 board minutes. Is there a motion on those?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Any questions or comments or deletions or additions? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The minutes have been approved. So we're going to go slightly out of order here, and we're going to move now to the public comment period. This is on the two variances. The department has requested a variance to allow them an additional time to complete a one-year pilot program involving video surveillance cameras and vehicles used to transport people in custody. Additionally, it would allow DOC more time to submit a written evaluation of the pilot. DOC has also requested a variance renewal to allow them to continue to house young adults ages 19 to 21 with people over the age of 21. This is a variance the board has granted continuously since September 2015. In July, when this last came for a vote, the board required the department to submit a plan to house substantially all young adults and young adult housing. This plan was submitted to us last week. Because of these two votes, we will have a public comment now with respect to the two variances, and we'll have another comment period at the end of the meeting for more general comments. The iPad on the stage will tell you how much time you have left, and we will now hear from three people on the two variances. The first is Simone Spierig, Brooklyn Defenders.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Simone Speard. I'm a jail services social worker at Brooklyn Defender Services. BDS urges the board to reject the department's variance related to commingling. The department's practice of commingling youth and older adults leads to severe limitations on the young people's access to programming, services, and schooling that are critical for their health, safety, and welfare. Through hundreds of visits with clients each month, my colleagues and I at BDS see the impact on our young clients as they languish in jail cells without the opportunity to participate in meaningful interventions targeted to their particular needs, interventions that could be critical to their reentry to the community. For example, one 19-year-old client who is in a commingled unit at OBCC was recently told that he cannot access school despite his numerous attempts to advocate for himself. This young man wants to go to school and work towards his future, but simply because of his housing location, he has been denied that opportunity. It is well recognized by the public, advocates, and this board that idleness contributes to a person's mental health, safety, and behavior. In its recent young adult plan update, the department appears to acknowledge the importance of keeping young minds engaged, claiming that programs are and will be an essential part of any commingled unit. Yet the reality that our clients live is a far cry from the vision the department outlines. The purported plan that the department released earlier this month does not provide any specific proposals to ensure young people have adequate access to programming. It also fails to provide information to ensure these young people's rights are protected. It does not delineate specific criteria for young adults being placed in commingled units, and does not specify how a young person can advocate for himself to ensure he returns to housing amongst his peers. Another client of ours exemplifies the problem with the lack of procedures. This 20-year-old man, currently at GRVC, was moved to GRVC from GMDC with no notice or explanation as to why he was being moved to a commingled unit. We urge the board to demand that the department is transparent about their commingling practices and guarantees all young people, regardless of their housing unit, access to vital programming and schooling. Without those assurances and that necessary transparency, we cannot fully understand the department's commingling practices and urge the board to reject the department's variance request and instead urge you to move towards rulemaking. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The next speaker is Danielle Gerard, Children's Rights.
Mr. Cephas and board members, my name is Danielle Gerard. I'm a staff attorney with Children's Rights, which has been a national advocate for youth in state systems. We're also a member of the Department of Corrections Adolescent and Young Adult Advisory Board and the New York Jails Action Coalition. We urge the Board of Correction to deny the variance request to commingle young adults ages 19 to 21 with adults 22 years and older. We ask that the Board instead require the Department to provide access to young adult housing, programming, and services for all young adults. We also ask that the Board require the Department to report on the progress of ensuring that age-specific programming, including education, continue to be offered regularly to every young adult housed at Rikers. As of October 2018, the department reported that only 52% of eligible males and 90% of eligible females were living in young adult housing units. But it is widely acknowledged that development continues through early adulthood, and providing age-specific programming ensures that this development continues. By restricting young adults to commingled housing units, the department is effectively cutting them off from regular access to key programs and services. The department's current stance that complying with provisions of the minimum standards would undermine the benefits and positive trends in violence reduction directly contradicts its earlier plan to house the majority of young adults in one facility following transfer of 16 and 17-year-olds to Horizons as part of Raise the Age. We would like to take this opportunity to point out that there are safer and more effective opportunities not only for young adults to be exposed to specific and positive adult influences, but also to contribute to violence reduction. We would be happy to meet with department officials and other advocates to discuss best practices in this area. Young adults have unique needs. They should be in unique housing to address them. At GMDC, young adults were in fact provided with age-specific programming and services to promote their continued development and successful re-entry into their communities. Unfortunately, as you know, GMDC has been closed after undergoing a multi-million-dollar renovation, but we understand that it has the capacity to hold all young adults from 18 to 21 and has the capacity to provide the requisite programming and services to them. We respectfully request the board to address the following questions. Why was GMDC closed? How does the department plan to provide services to young adults who are commingled with adults 22 and older? And what are the department's plans to enhance staffing ratios for young adults? Finally, we would like to take this opportunity to note our dismay at the violence that recently occurred at Horizon. We hope that department officials detail how they plan to ensure that there is no recurrence, what steps they are taking to make sure inmates and staff are safe, and what steps are being taken to ensure that sufficient numbers of youth development specialists will soon be employed at the facility. The department needs to ensure that appropriate programming and staff are available to manage this unique population that is required for Horizon for 16 to 7-year-olds, 16 to 17-year-olds, and at Rikers for 18 to 21-year-olds. We appreciate your consideration of these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Next is Kelsey Diavola.
Good morning. My name is Kelsey Diavola. I'm a jail services social worker at Brooklyn Defender Services. Our office is deeply troubled by the department's latest variance requests related to their pilot program of cameras on buses. This only further legitimizes the department's lack of accountability to end sexual abuse, and we urge the board to deny this variance request. One story of a woman clearly demonstrates the importance of the very practice the department seeks to avoid. Earlier in the day that Miss A was raped, she had appeared in court with her lawyer. After her appearance, she returned on an earlier afternoon bus back to Rikers Island. When Miss A was raped by a male officer at the back of the bus in a parking lot on Rikers Island, all while the driver of that bus sat and watched. When she reported the incident, the bruises on her wrists and thighs were clearly visible. The two officers on the bus held Miss A against her will and tortured her without anyone noticing or questioning the missing bus, the missing officers, the missing woman, or why it took more than 10 hours for Miss A to travel from court to her housing unit. This is only one story, and it's not unique. These are the types of circumstances that led this board to set these standards during rulemaking in 2016. And let's remind ourselves what the issue is here. This board required the department to institute a 1-year pilot program and to install video cameras on department transportation vehicles, and then they were to report back to you. And they have yet to do this. The deadline imposed by the board has already passed, and it's only recently, after the deadline passed, is DOC seeking permission to violate your standard. How can we ensure that the department is capable of providing competent investigations of sexual abuse when based on just recent reporting, the department's investigation practices are deeply flawed. And two, they can't even install cameras that are meant to deter such abuse from happening in the first place. BDS stands with our colleagues of the Legal Aid Society in requesting this board to issue notices of violations to the department's failure to end sexual abuse. These abysmal failures by the department only underscore the city's lack of concern to keep people in its custody safe and for those people to be heard. We urge the board to no longer be complacent in the department's violations and to reject this variance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, we can come back to her, isn't it?
For the department, can we proceed with? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. In April 2018, the department, in coordination with the city's Commission on Human Rights, announced that it would house people in custody consistent with their gender identity, unless otherwise required and as determined by an individualized safety assessment or in response to the express preference or concern of the person in custody. The board and many others have praised this announcement as an important step in the right direction. This change and plan should be in effect by October 13th. When fully implemented, the department will be in compliance with portions of the board's sexual abuse standards. We've asked the department to update us today on its plans and progress.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Faye Yalardi. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for PREA. I will be giving a brief update on our progress as it relates to operationalizing housing by gender identity. The department is in the final stages of developing policies and procedures that will supersede the pre-existing transgender housing unit directive. We are working diligently towards operationalizing housing our transgender population in units other than the THU and have instituted instrumental housing changes towards housing by gender identity. On July 31st, the transgender housing unit was relocated from the Manhattan Detention Center, a male facility, to the Rose M. Singer Center, the department's female facility located on Rikers Island. This move of the transgender housing unit from a male to a female facility is serving as a guide and providing valuable lessons during the implementation and planning phase. As a result of the move to Rose M. Singer, our transgender women in the transgender housing unit now have access to expanded programming, including structured recreation, cooking classes, and the beauty salon. These programs were not available to them in the male facility. The department is in the process of establishing a housing committee that will be tasked with the responsibility of reviewing and making housing determinations for individuals who identify as transgender. In addition, we are also contemplating what corresponding changes will be needed to the intake and new admission process. The intake process, as it relates to housing placement, is under review as we continue the development of operationalizing housing by gender identity. During the current intake process, utilizing a screening tool, the department tracks individuals in our custody who identify as transgender. The PREA team will be responsible for ensuring that each person is considered for housing based on their gender identity and not solely based on their genitalia. A determination will be made based on self-reporting, information obtained from the PREA team, security concerns, and relevant information provided by Correctional Health Services. As of September 17th, the department opened a new admission housing unit for our transgender and intersex population. An inmate may be admitted into this unit while a case-by-case assessment is completed. Our Rose M. Singer Center staff will continue to receive training that focuses on the LGBTI GNC population in addition to the 4-hour PREA employee training. The training utilized by the department was developed by the advocates, which we worked closely with during the inception of the transgender housing unit. The training focuses on the professional interaction with transgender inmates, and we are also working on integrating the current training with training provided by the PREA Resource Center. The department has submitted 2 updates to the New York City Commission on Human Rights regarding the modifications being implemented to the department's policies and procedures to comply with Executive Order 16. And these reports were previously shared with the board. The department will continue to work with the New York City Commission on Human Rights to align on principles of gender identity and effectuate custody management reforms by the October deadline. As always, we are taking our PREA obligation very seriously and dedicated to making sure all facilities are sexually safe. We remain committed to full compliance with PREA and sexual safety for all who come into our custody. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board here?
Do you know how many applications are rejected by the department?
How many?
Applications for entering the transgender units are rejected by the Department of Corrections.
On average, you're asking?
How many this month, how many last month, how many in a year, I don't know, some, just for the board to understand how this program works.
I don't have those specific numbers, but I can definitely get that to the board.
Do you know what the average is?
The average, I don't have the numbers with me, but I can get that to the board.
Is it more than half or less than half or more than half?
I don't have those numbers, but I can get that to the board as soon as possible.
What's the capacity for the trans housing unit?
We have approximately 40 beds in the unit. We have 12 individuals in the unit right now, and 42 individuals who we know identify as transgender female.
When do you expect the written policy and the new admission unit to be written and distributed?
It's in the final stages. It's being distributed for approval. It's in draft form right now.
Is it a directive or?
It's a directive that's going to replace the current Transgender Housing Unit Directive 4498.
And what would govern the other unit, not the THU, the new admission housing units that you were referring to at Rosensinger?
That directive would encompass all of it, including the Transgender Housing Unit.
And just so I understand, so someone who identifies as male, are they also sent to those, or is there another housing unit that they are?
Individuals who identify as transgender male are housed at Rosie's currently.
So they both housed at Rosie's?
Yes, currently. And just to give you a little snapshot, from January of this year to September of this year, we approved 68 transgender housing unit application. We refused 15, and 13 were denied based on medical reasons.
I'm sorry, based on?
Medical reasons?
What would those be?
I don't know. We're not privy to that information.
I wonder if CHS could comment on that?
So I'm not entirely sure in these particular cases, but certain levels of care would preclude housing in that particular unit, including the need for PACE or CAPS level of mental health care or infirmary housing. So those are possibly the cases, though I don't know those specifics.
Thank you.
Could you just go through that math one more time?
Sorry.
Thank you.
We approved 68 applications to the transgender housing unit. We refused 15, and 13 were denied due to medical reasons.
The 13 are not embedded in the 15, right?
Right.
And the doctor explained to us why you turned down the 13, or perhaps they were turned down. Why were the other 15 turned down?
It might be because for security concerns, they may have assaultive behavior or they might be assessed as a potential sexual abuser and therefore not qualify for the transgender housing unit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Martha, you...
We are going to move on to the next agenda item. The board staff last reported on the implementation of and compliance with the sexual abuse and harassment standards in April 2018. We've committed to continue reporting at least every 6 months on these issues at the public meetings, focusing on provisions that DOC, Correctional Health, and BOC review together in quarterly meetings. So now I'll ask our Deputy Executive Director of Research, Emily Turner, and Senior Director of Research, Cassandra Ramdath, to present the update.
Good morning. My name is Cassandra Ramdath, and I joined the board as the Senior Director of Research earlier this year in April. Since then, I've been leading our oversight on the elimination of sexual abuse and sexual harassment in DOC facilities, and in this role, I'm determined to advance public transparency, best practices, and compliance on this topic. The board is committed to providing an update on implementation of and compliance with these standards every 6 months. Today, I'll focus on the launch of our Public Transparency Initiative, updates on board oversight, and upcoming areas of focus. Then Deputy Executive Director Emily Turner will present findings from our audit of closing memos. So first, I'd like to highlight that the Board of Corrections staff has worked diligently to develop a tracking system for compliance with the standards that have reporting requirements. So this dashboard shows all of CHS and DOC reporting requirements, as well as deadlines and submission statuses. This is available on the Board of Correction website, and it's something that we're going to be updating and sharing publicly on a quarterly basis. Also, moving forward, we will expand this system so that it tracks and publicly reports on all other PREA standards. Next, I'll provide an update on board oversight with regards to screenings and investigations. Following the board's October 2017 resolution, in February 2018, the department fully implemented an electronic PREA screening tool in all facilities. This is very important progress as it enables DOC to track and report on those at risk of sexual victimization. For example, at the July 18th PREA quarterly meeting, DOC was able to report to the board that since full implementation, 3,679 people screened as at risk of sexual victimization and 461 people screened as at risk of sexual abusiveness. DOC uses this information to house and separate those who are at risk for sexual victimization from those who are at risk of being sexually abusive. The screening is also used to identify transgender and intersex individuals who may apply to be housed in the Transgender Housing Unit or the THU. As a result of the board's October resolution, as of November 1st, 2017, DOC has been submitting reports on the placement and movement of these individuals on a consistent and timely basis. On July 31st, 2018, DOC moved the THU from Manhattan Detention Center to Rose M. Singers Complex. The board applauds DOC for this move, as transgender women housed there can now more easily access gender-responsive programming and preferred commissary items and toiletries. By October 13th, DOC must come into compliance with Executive Order 16 and house individuals consistent with their gender identity. Successful compliance with this executive order will also bring them into compliance with the board standards in this area. The board will continue to monitor DOC's implementation of housing by gender identity and will complete a comprehensive analysis of their policy for housing transgender people next year. Next, I'll provide an update on DOC investigations of sexual abuse and sexual harassment allegations. In June 2018, DOC submitted a corrective action plan which aimed to close 1,216 backlogged cases by February 2019. Since then, DOC has been consistently submitting closing memos to the board. The board has received a total of 373 closing memos, 64 in 2017 and 309 in 2018 so far. This is good progress, but board staff remains concerned about the timeliness and quality of these investigations, which Emily will discuss further. As DOC proceeds with closing more investigations, they remain out of compliance with the requirement to complete and submit sexual abuse incident reviews, or SAREs. SAREs are to be completed for all substantiated and unsubstantiated cases. These are important because they offer the opportunity for DOC to identify lessons and recommendations for reducing future risk. And the board has only received 5 SAREs to date. Based on the number of closing memos, we are missing nearly all SAREs. We encourage DOC to update its corrective action plan and address this backlog as it works to close investigations on a more timely basis. So next, I'm going to turn to areas of the standards that we're going to be focusing on more.
Did you look at individuals who were charged multiple times? So that were identified as potential complainants multiple times with multiple people?
For what?
When you looked at the data, could you tell whether or not the individuals who may have been under review were charged or suggested multiple times that they were doing something untoward? Can you look at that?
So there's two, in the incident level data that we require DOC give to us, that type of information should be there. There are still many missing data points in the individual level data, so that is not an issue that we've looked at in depth. And then additionally, in the audit report, you'll see that one of the issues when looking at the closing memos is that the closing memos and the investigations don't clearly review the history of complaints against the accused perpetrator in each investigation. So no, we haven't looked at that, and certainly it's an issue we can talk more with DOC about.
Excuse me, and thank you.
So next, I'll turn to areas of the standards that the board will be focusing oversight on moving forward, and that includes DOC employee training, staffing plans, and 540 reporting. DOC reports that in 2017, 1,960 of their staff were trained, which is about 20% as required by the standards, and that 1,879 additional staff have been trained in 2018. Between May and July of this year, 15 Board of Corrections staff members attended and observed DOC PREA trainings and are working to synthesize feedback for the department. Before the next update in March, board staff will submit a memo to DOC with these findings and recommendations for improved training. DOC submitted facility-specific staffing plans to the board on March 27th of this year. BOC staff have also reviewed these plans and will provide a memo with feedback to the department before March 2019, when their next submission is due and when we will be providing the next update. Section 540 of the PREA standards require DOC to issue a public self-assessment and to provide BOC with incident-level data on sexual abuse and sexual harassment allegations every 6 months. The public assessments provided by DOC to date have been confusing to follow over time. The previous report submitted in March and the latest report submitted in August of 2018 have different formats, include different reporting categories, and cover different time intervals. This makes it difficult to compare and identify trends. The incident level data underlying these reports were submitted to the board but are missing key information that's required to be reported and cannot be reconciled with the numbers in the DOC public reports. Before the next update in March 2019, board staff will work with the department to prepare a standard template for 540 self-assessment reports to improve their clarity and their consistency. The board also recommends that DOC prioritize the development of a robust case management system and immediately dedicate staff towards data management and analysis for improved 540 data reporting and self-assessment reports as well. Lastly, DOC is out of compliance with zero tolerance requirements to designate one PREA compliance manager, or PCM, to every DOC facility. Currently, five out of 10 facilities have a PCM, and PCMs are important as they play a role in the safe housing of people in custody, training of staff, and conducting the sexual assault incident reviews. The department informed BOC that 2 additional PCMs were recently hired, but have not yet been assigned to their facility. They also informed that funding was requested for 12 PCMs, but only 8 positions had been approved. BOC recommends that the department move quickly to fund and fill all required PCM positions to come into compliance with the standard and to fully implement its zero tolerance policy. Now, Emily Turner will present on the board's findings of the closing memos audit.
Good morning. Today I'll be presenting findings and recommendations from the board's audit of closing reports for DOC investigations of sexual abuse and harassment allegations. Before jumping into the findings and recommendations, I'd like to start by thanking the department for their cooperation with the audit process and for their thoughtful and timely response, which we have published on our website alongside our report. In response to the department's feedback, we have updated and amended our report to reflect additional information and clarifications provided by the department. To begin, I'd like to take a step back and help put the subject of this audit in context, and that is closing memos. Looking back in the statement of basis and purpose of the board's proposed PREA rules, the rulemaking committee concluded that department's investigations of allegations of staff on inmate sexual abuse were deficient in terms of timeliness, thoroughness, and objectivity, as borne out by the fact that from 2013 to 2015, only 5 out of 294 of these allegations were substantiated. For this reason, the board incorporated federal PREA standards requiring that all investigations be documented in a written report that contains a thorough description of physical, testimonial, and documentary evidence, and attach all copies of documentary evidence where feasible. And the board added a requirement that DOC prepare a closing memo summarizing the findings of each investigation of sexual abuse or harassment. While DOC's improved closure of investigations since April 2018 is commendable, merely the number of closed investigations does not tell us whether those investigations were thorough or objective, and in turn, whether DOC's findings are correct. That is why the content and quality of closing memos is so important, and why the board undertook this audit. The board audited 42 closing reports, which were sampled to accurately reflect the types of allegations received by DOC. 29% related to staff on inmate sexual abuse, 31% related to staff on inmate sexual harassment, and 24% related to inmate on inmate sexual abuse, 17% related to inmate on inmate sexual harassment. The majority of alleged victims were men, 76%. 12% were from women, and 12% were from victims who self-identified as transgender women. In terms of timeliness, the standards require that all persons in custody subject to alleged sexual abuse or sexual harassment must be interviewed within 72 hours of the referral date. The standards also require that the department complete all investigations no later than 90 days from the referral date. Our audit found that timely interviews were conducted with the majority of alleged victims within 72 hours. Only one of the closing reports audited was completed within the 90 days. 28 were still open after 90 days, and for 13, it was impossible to establish when the investigation was closed. For cases with available closing dates, the average time from referral to completion was 510 calendar days. In terms of interviews, the standards require that investigators interview alleged victims, perpetrators, and witnesses. Alleged perpetrators were interviewed in 55% of the investigations audited. Witnesses were interviewed in 45% of the investigations audited. There are, of course, instances where interviews of alleged perpetrators are not possible. They are not always identified. But the board is concerned by the cases where perpetrators appear simply to have refused to be interviewed in the case of people in custody, or to have somehow avoided interviews in the case of staff. Interviews of perpetrators are a key requirement of PREA investigations, and there need to be exceptional and compelling reasons for them not to take place. The audit report notes that in 5 cases of allegations against staff, the investigator relied on camera footage or statements rather than interviewing the staff member as required. In terms of confidentiality, the standards require that requests for statements or interviews of people in custody be made off the living unit and cannot be made within sight of other people in custody or staff involved in the incident. The standards also require that interviews of people in custody be conducted in a private and confidential setting. From the information available in closing reports, it was impossible to conclude whether interviews were generally conducted in private and confidential locations. In terms of post-allegation services, the standards require that people in custody who are victims of sexual abuse must be provided with timely and unimpeded access to free emergency medical treatment and crisis intervention services. In almost all cases, alleged victims were reported as being offered some post-incident services after DOC received their allegation. This is an encouraging finding. These services include medical, mental health, and victim services, or some combination thereof. In terms of establishing a crime scene and reviewing evidence, the standards and department policy require that the department follow a uniform protocol that maximizes the potential for obtaining usable physical evidence for administrative proceedings and criminal prosecutions, and for establishing crime scenes. In 41% of sexual abuse allegations audited, there was insufficient information recorded regarding the establishment of a crime scene. This finding is not intended to suggest that crime scenes need always be established, but rather that the decisions around establishing a crime scene should be seen as a core part of an investigation and documented accordingly. Just over half, or 55% of investigations included a review of physical evidence. In about a quarter of cases, the investigations included a review of all available testimonial evidence, such as monitoring information, records, and witness statements. In terms of review of prior complaints and credibility assessments, the standards require that investigators must review prior complaints and reports of sexual abuse involving the suspected perpetrator. Investigators generally failed to review prior allegations against all alleged perpetrators and did so in only 4 cases. In half of the cases, the investigator adequately performed credibility assessments. Credibility assessments were deemed adequate if they included a discussion of the consistency and plausibility of the account provided by the individual and whether objective evidence corroborated the account. In terms of substantiation, the standards require that all investigations must include an effort to determine whether staff actions or failures to act contributed to the abuse, and must be documented in writing in written reports that include a description of physical, testimonial, and documentary evidence, as well as the reasoning behind credibility assessments and investigative facts and findings. In half of the cases audited, the investigator adequately described the reasoning of what is substantiated, meaning there was a specific explanation of what elements of the allegation were verified or disproved. Finally, in terms of determinations, 1 of the 42 investigations concluded that staff actions or failures contributed to the incident. Nearly all, 95% of the 42 allegations were substantiated or unfounded. The standards require that at the conclusion of an investigation, DOC inform the alleged victim whether the allegation has been determined to be substantiated, unsubstantiated, or unfounded. Victims were informed of the investigation results in a quarter of these cases audited. Most victims were no longer in custody at the time of the determination, and in some cases, the department did still attempt to notify victims who had left custody. In light of these findings, we have a number of recommendations for DOC. First, we recommend that DOC retrain investigators and supervisory staff to ensure that all staff are familiar with the requirements of the standards and have a clear understanding of what constitutes a complete and adequate reporting on investigations. We also recommend that the department revise and improve the closing report format. The investigations reporting format, including the department's June 2018 update to the form, is not sufficient to record all the detail regarding the precise investigative steps that have been taken in relation to interviews and available evidence. We recommend the department amend the closing report template to ensure that investigators can clearly follow the requirements and record comprehensive information required by the standards. The form should also include sections and guidance for fully explaining the different sources of evidence the investigation considered or decided not to consider. We are encouraged that the department has agreed to update the format and has already agreed to implement the recommendations from our audit. We also recommended that the department audit itself to identify and address reasons for delays. It was not always clear from the format of the closing memos exactly what was causing the delay. We just noticed that there were delays in the process, and more in-depth audit, sort of self-reflection and audit by the department would help shed light on those issues and suggest internal policy changes. We also recommend that the department ensure interviews are conducted in private and confidential spaces. This is a very important part of the PREA investigations standards, and the closing reports need to document precisely when and where interviews are occurring. Finally, we recommended that the department notify alleged victims of the outcomes of investigations, even if no longer in DOC custody. Again, this is something that the department has already started attempting to doing, but we recommend that this take place as a matter of policy. And then finally, we had a recommendation for ourselves and are making a public commitment that the board will audit closing memos on an annual basis to monitor progress and see how these recommendations are being implemented. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily and Cassandra, for that report. So we're going to come back to this in a minute. We'll hear from the department. There will be plenty of time for the board to ask questions. City Council member Helen Rosenthal is here with us this morning and would like to make a presentation. So I'm going to have her come up again. As you all know, she's from District 6, covering the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Councilmember Rosenthal is the chair of the Council's Committee on Women, and she's also co-chaired a September 6th Council Oversight hearing on sexual abuse and sexual harassment in the city jails. Councilwoman, welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. That took care of the first paragraph of my presentation. We had such a good hearing, and Dr. Safer, you testified, and Executive Director King, you were there as well, and we really appreciated your testimony. We learned a lot at the hearing, all of which was completely disturbing. And we didn't hear, I appreciate the recommendations that the board has made for moving forward. I wanted to let you know that on the day of the hearing, I submitted requests for 3 pieces of legislation. The first one is the one that you've recommended, which is to require that the Department of Correction convene a community planning task force with community members to address trans and gender nonconforming individuals' housing, require that DOC make the housing decisions on a case-by-case basis, including consideration of gender identity rather than external genital anatomy. that's one of yours, right? Just checking. And then the two others were that, one, the Department of Corrections received FETI training, which is the training that we are now possibly having to legislate that the that the police department, special victims division detectives, that they receive that training, and that the police officers receive it as well. And lastly, that the Department of Correction establish an electronic case management system for its investigations of sexual abuse. I was stunned to hear that everything's done on paper still in 2018. So those were the pieces of legislation that I asked for. As you know, Councilmember Cumbo has legislation that was discussed at the hearing to require that the Department of Correction report on sexual abuse, and Councilmember Drum has a piece of legislation requiring the department to report on sexual abuse of visitors. That concludes my testimony. Thank you for taking the time to hear me.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much for coming. So now we go back to our report, and also have the DOC. Yeah. Sure.
DOC will present their update in this area.
Good morning. My name is Serena Townsend. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Investigation and Trials. I last testified here on June 12th, 2018, regarding PREA investigations and the department's corrective action plan for compliance with board minimum standards. Today, I will provide information and updates to 3 PREA-related topics: the board's audit of Investigation Division's closing memoranda, an update on progress made under our corrective action plan, and the recently published 540 assessment report for January through June of 2018. Regarding the board's audit, in May of 2018, the board selected 42 investigation closing reports to review. This audit of PREA investigations was only of closing memorandums and not of actual investigation case files. The 42 audited reports were broken down categorically: 12 related to staff on inmate sexual abuse and assault, 13 related to staff on inmate sexual harassment, 10 related to inmate on inmate sexual assault or abuse, and 7 related to inmate on inmate sexual harassment allegations. 76% of the alleged victims were male, 12% female, and 12% identified themselves as transgender female. The board reported 15 findings. Some of the findings were substantive and related to the investigations themselves, such as whether a crime scene was established in all cases or whether alleged victims were interviewed in a timely fashion. Some of the findings, however, noted procedural concerns, such as whether investigator interviews were conducted in a confidential setting, and whether alleged victims who were released from DOC custody were sent determination letters upon completion of an investigation. The audit corroborated what the department has been saying regarding its prioritization of potential victims over paperwork. The investigations are occurring within those first 72 hours, but because of understaffing, the investigation division struggled to close cases administratively and is thus facing a backlog. The department is encouraged that the board's audit demonstrated that in the vast majority of cases, initial investigative tasks are conducted promptly upon notification of an allegation. And although the department shares the board's justifiable concern about the backlog, under the department's corrective action plan, the backlog will be eliminated by early 2019. The department composed a written response to the audit, which is public, but I'm prepared to address any questions you may have about our response. Additionally, last month, the department provided an updated PREA closing report memo for the board's review, which prompts the investigator to detail more about their investigation so that when the board audits again, it will have the reassurance that certain steps were taken before closing the case. Many of the board's concerns are remedied by these revisions. As for an update on our corrective action plan, since the announcement of the corrective action plan in June 2018, the department has hired and assigned 6 additional PREA-certified investigation, actually 8 additional PREA-certified investigators to the investigation PREA team, and as of last week has closed over 250 more cases. This is a total of almost 350 cases closed since April of 2018, when the department was afforded additional investigator lines and began the hiring process. With the addition this month of 2 more investigators and a second deputy director on the PREA team, a retired NYPD detective with extensive special victims experience, the department is easily on track to fulfilling its staffing goals as described in the corrective action plan. More importantly, the department is also on track to rid its backlog by early 2019. And lastly, regarding the 540 assessment report, earlier this summer, the department provided information to the board in the form of the 540 assessment report, which the department is mandated to produce every 6 months. The report also compares the 6-month data from January 2018 through June 2018 against the data for the previous 6 months, July 2017 through December 2017, in order to track changes, patterns, and progress. Some highlights from that report include the fact that allegations are down this reporting period in every single PREA category, with the exception of 1, inmate on inmate sexual abuse allegations. Notably, staff on inmate sexual abuse allegations are down from the prior period by 22%. Staff on inmate sexual harassment allegations are down from the prior period by 74%. And I just wanted to mention, after Councilmember Rosenthal's testimony regarding FEDI, that we already have 4 individuals from our PREA team signed up for that very FEDI training that you were referring to, and it's they are set to be trained, I believe, later this week or early next week. So that is something we have already contemplated. In conclusion, the department will continue its efforts to becoming compliant with board minimum standards and will update the board on our progress every 6 months as mandated. Thank you.
And also, before we take questions, I just want to do a point of information or clarification. Since 2016 to present, we have 7,900 staff members who are trained with the 4-hour PREA training. This includes over 250 civilians and over 300 volunteers. We have over 5,600 security staff members who are trained in the cross-gender PATFISH training, and we just started our refresher training, and we have approximately 1,100 of our staff members trained on the 2-hour refresher training that happens every 2 years. So I just wanted to do a point of clarification for those numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone at the board level, questions or comments or thoughts on this?
So, do you, the last time I came here, I think I it's critically important. You're hiring people like the one that you described. In my judgment, is a big piece of business here, because these are very serious matters, and sometimes, not just in law enforcement, but in the private sector, non-trained investigators are asked to do these type of interviews, and trained investigators are much better at this stuff.
Completely agree. That's why we make sure that our investigators are trained and that we are doing extra training, like that FEDI training, as well as we are setting up for our investigators to do special victims training with the NYPD as well.
Why do you think the 74% drop?
I believe there's probably many reasons for that, but one of the main reasons I believe that that's happening is when we worked with the Moss Group, who knows these kinds of audits well, and they know what happens when you start implementing PREA standards. They had advised us that this was probably going to happen, that once we improved our reporting systems and we made those changes, the reporting would go up drastically and then eventually level out. I believe we're probably in the leveling out stage.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you tell us something about FE training, what that involves and how that's different from what you currently do?
Sure. It's more science-based and neurology-based. And so it specifically discusses how to have these interviews with victims who've experienced trauma, and how people who've experienced trauma encode those experiences differently in their brains, and how investigators need to be able to speak to individuals like this in a different way, because you have to be able to have that level of communication that may be different. It's a lot more listening and taking in from the alleged victim who may have experienced that kind of trauma, and it's just a very different type of interview than interviewing any other type of crime victim.
FETY, is that what?
FETI.
FETI.
Yes.
Okay.
It's Forensic Experiential Training Institute, I think. FETI.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Judge Hamill.
I believe you have an electronic tracking system for the Nunez consent judgment, right, to be able
Yes.
to report to the federal monitor?
That is correct.
Consent judgment. Is there a reason we don't have an electronic case management system for PREA, given its importance?
Right now we do have a system in place. It is not the case management system that we currently have, which is newer for the use of force cases under Nunez. However, phase 1 was for Nunez, and phase 2 will address PREA cases. And so we are en route to incorporating PREA cases into that very same case management system. It's just with the technology, it's taken a little bit of time.
What's the time frame for having that implemented?
Just to also add that when the case management system was developed, it was for use of force only. And that was so that we would be able to come in compliance with the Nunez consent judgment. In terms of phase 2, which is for all other cases that the department needs to track, that is something that we're working out with the vendor. We have things that we have to work out in terms of finalizing the details and the parameters of the next phase. So we're not 100% sure about exactly when that will happen. That's something that we can circle back with you and the board on in terms of timing.
Since you've alluded to that tracking PREA and other types of cases, what other types of cases are you prioritizing for electronic tracking?
Well, there are many investigations that the department does that's not use of force related. It could be undue familiarity type cases, any kind of other case that the investigations division would track. The legal division, cases that come in through the legal division, tracking those types of cases, and same thing with trials and everywhere else in the department, just everything that the department investigates other than use of force, which covers a wide range of topics, some of which I just mentioned.
Thank you.
Could you talk about, in the audit, it said one of the 42 investigations concluded that staff actions or failures contributed to the incident. Could you speak to that? Why is that so low? Because that seems to be an opportunity for like lessons learned.
Sure. So one case out of the 42, I think, was about 5%. It sounds low, but the Bureau of Justice Statistics came out with their assessment of substantiation rates nationally. And nationally, the substantiation rate is about 6%. So, and frankly, even though there was just one of the 42 giving us 5% for this particular audit, overall, in our investigations, we are hovering around 6.5% substantiation rate. So it does sound low, but it is in line with the national average.
Right, but I wasn't talking about, I'm not talking about substantiation. I'm talking
I'm
about
sorry.
whether or not staff actions either contributed to or could have prevented the assault. So it's on the determinations. It says one out of the 42 cases concluded that staff actions or failures contributed to the incident. So that seems like there's an opportunity to really look and see what can we do differently. Like
Yes.
if staff either failed to do something that could have prevented it, what can we do differently? And I just want to understand why it's so low in that conclusion. It seems like every closing report should have an assessment of whether or not the department could have done something differently to prevent that. And if you can't, so to speak to that, that's fine, but that's what I'm asking.
Okay. Well, I think that additional training obviously would help in that arena. And then with respect to that particular case, obviously, we substantiated those charges. We will be meting out discipline to that individual, and hopefully that would also help get that person aligned to the appropriate standards.
Dr. Cohen.
Yes, in the presentation and in our reports, it was noted that essentially none of the sexual abuse incident reviews were completed. 2 out of hundreds or thousands were completed. What is your plan to complete these, and what's the time frame for that? Why aren't you, and when will we expect to see all of them completed?
So we don't have a time frame of when we're going to get them all completed. However, we do have a plan. Previously, it was only the PREA compliance managers that were conducting the SAREs, the sexual abuse incident reviews. We are currently training not just the PREA compliance managers, but also the PREA ambassadors that are assigned to the facilities to start conducting these SAREs as well. It takes time. We have a lot of cases that are currently being closed that require now a SARES, and so because of that, because ID is doing such a great job with closing these cases, we now came up with that plan to have additional people to do the SARES, to try to keep up with that. How many do we need?
Have you hired the people that you need to do this?
It's not.
Have you identified the numbers that you need to do it?
We're still doing an assessment of that. Remember, these cases are just being closed within the last few months, and so we're doing an assessment. We know that we need more than the 5 individuals, and we're having a training for an additional at least 10 individuals to conduct those trainings. So we'll have approximately 15 people to do SARES on a regular basis.
Any other thoughts or comments at the board level?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so in response to the concerns that were identified in the board staff audit of the closing reports, I'm proposing a resolution for the board which will establish certain timelines for response and corrective action by the department to these issues. They certainly have agreed initially on receipt of our audit to discuss it with us. I believe it would be appropriate for the board to issue a resolution that will require regular reporting by the department of their completion of these tasks of improving the closing. The closing reports and basically doing the investigations. I mean, several months ago, we identified a continuing process of failure to complete the investigations. The department has responded to that. Now, today, actually, the department has had this audit for a while now. Certainly we were prepared to discuss this in September. We are now aware as a board that the quality of these investigations leaves much to be desired and have to be improved quickly. So there's a resolution that I propose to the board for passage to address this.
I think it has to be.
Yeah.
Can we have someone else read it?
You want to read it?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to do it up there?
What's that? Oh, go to the podium? Cool.
Thank you, Ben.
Wheretofore, the audit of the Board of Correction of the investigations conducted by the Department of Correction into sexual abuse and sexual harassment found multiple deficiencies in DOC's investigations in noncompliance with portions of BOC Minimum Standards 5-30. Wherefore, these deficiencies are unacceptable because timely and comprehensive investigations are critical to ensuring justice for survivors of sexual violence and sexual harassment, affording a reliable and accountable process for alleged perpetrators, and guaranteeing accountability that will deter sexual violence. Wherefore, Minimum Standard 5-40 requires the department to collect accurate, uniform data for each alleged incident of sexual abuse at facilities using a standardized instrument and definitions, and to review this incident data in order to assess and improve the effectiveness of its sexual abuse and sexual harassment prevention, detection, and response policies, practices, and present this information in public semi-annual assessment reports. Wherefore, the 540 data reports submitted by the department are missing data elements required by the standards, and the board has been unable to reconcile the data provided with the information presented in public semi-annual assessment reports prepared by the department. Therefore, be it resolved, the department shall take the following remedial action to cure these violations. 1. By November 8, 2018, submit a written corrective action plan to improve the quality of these investigations and the quality of 540 data and assessment reporting. The corrective action plan shall include timelines and steps for implementing the 8 recommendations set forth in BOC's audit report and any other action steps needed to achieve compliance with Minimum Standard 5-30 and 5-40. The corrective action plan shall also establish a timeline for implementing and using a computerized case management system for sexual abuse and harassment claims within the next 12 months. 2. Submit monthly written progress reports on the corrective action plan beginning December 1st, 2018, and on the first day of each month thereafter. 3. By November 8th, 2018, provide all information related to training of PREA investigators and supervisors, including copies of all training modules and materials detailing the content covered in training, the names of all investigation staff required to be trained, and the dates each staff member completed training. 4. By November 8th, 2018, ensure that all interviews and requests related to investigations are conducted in private and confidential settings. These interviews and requests must take place outside of the living units and shall not be made within sight or hearing of other people in custody or staff involved in the incident. By December 1st, 2018, include details on how the department is complying with this requirement in its monthly written progress report. 5. Effective immediately, require that all investigations include a review of all available evidence, including the alleged perpetrator's prior history of allegations, as well as credibility determinations regarding complainants, alleged perpetrators, and other witnesses. 6. By November 8th, 2018, require signed supervisory review of all investigations at 15, 30, 60, and 90 days. And if an investigation is not completed within the required 90 days, the supervisor must review the case every 15 days until completed. And finally, 7, by December 1st, submit a 540 assessment report template for review and approval of the board.
Any questions or comments further from the board level? No. Does the department have anything they want to share with us on that variance?
The department we take the substantive obligations and all obligations under the minimum standards seriously, and we will take all of these recommendations under serious consideration. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there a motion to...
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll go roll call here. Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Dr. Safir?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Marino?
Yes.
Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Judge Hamill?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen, I
Yes.
assume you're in favor of this?
Yes.
Okay, it carries. Thank you very much. Yes, I vote yes as well. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Department of Corrections variance request regarding video surveillance cameras in vehicles used to transport people in custody. As part of efforts to eliminate sexual abuse and harassment in the jails, the board's minimum standards require the DOC to institute a one-year pilot program to install video surveillance cameras in vehicles used to support people in custody by July 31st, 2017. The standards also require the department to submit an evaluation of that pilot program by September 1, 2018. The board had required a pilot in order for the department to determine the benefits and challenges of cameras on transportation vehicles and whether all transportation vehicles should have camera coverage. On August 17, 2018, the department submitted a letter to the board requesting an extension of the deadline for its pilot and a report until May 1st, 2019. The board is considering this letter request as a variance request. Will the department please present this matter?
Good morning. Pursuant to Section 1-15B of the New York City Board of Correction Minimum Standards, the department requests a 6-month limited variance from BOC Minimum Standard Section 5-04G, which is titled Supervision and Monitoring, and requires that by July 31st, 2017, the department shall institute a one-year pilot program to install video surveillance cameras in department vehicles used to transport inmates. In addition, that by September 1st, 2018, the department shall provide a written report to the board evaluating the results of the pilot program, including any benefits or challenges associated with the installation of video surveillance cameras in inmate transport vehicles. The department is requesting this variance to allow for the additional time needed to complete the pilot and to submit the report by March 1st, 2019.
Is there a motion? There's no motion. I'll move it. Is there a second?
I think on this one, you know, every Uber in the city has a camera in it. They figured it out. Every taxi cab has a camera in it. It just seems like it's taking too long.
Okay. I'm with you. Great. Could we hear what's
Yeah.
preventing the department, like 2016, what's preventing the department from?
So more than a year ago, prior to the implementation of the date of the commencement of this pilot in July 2017, the department installed 5 body-worn cameras mounted in transportation vehicles as an interim solution to try and address, at the time, which was incidents of violence on transport buses. The body-worn cameras have certain limitations. They have a limited charge. They have to be manually turned on. They have to be removed and docked in order to upload the video. The department, in August of 2017, as we explained to the board in some follow-up questions regarding this variance, the department commenced the pursuit of a procurement for a Genetec mobile solution to be installed on one of our transportation buses. That procurement took some time. There was some adjustment in the procurement process in accordance with MBWE standards, which the city procurement process rolled out early this year. And the bus now has been outfitted and returned to us. We are still working. There's 8 cameras inside the bus and 3 cameras outside the bus, so it's a multi-camera solution. That solution, because it's Genetec, it connects with our Genetec video surveillance system for our 14,000 other cameras. We are having some technical issues that we're continuing to work out with the vendor, because the bus, the way that the video uploads into the system is through wireless connectivity when the bus pulls into certain locations and sally ports. So we are, I think that is an important part of our pilot, to understand if the value of the Genetec solution, which is integrated with our system, because it is significantly more expensive, but we can get greater coverage in locations throughout the bus as opposed to just one body-worn camera mount, is an important component of our pilot. And because that bus was not returned to us until the first week of October because of the length of the procurement. We sought the extension of time from the board to do a pilot that was evaluative of both the body-worn cameras and the Genetec solution to make the decision about the investment in technology that would best serve this purpose.
So it's in place now?
Correct.
What you're asking for is time to evaluate it?
Correct. We've also added an additional 9 body-worn cameras to 9 additional transport vehicles, and we are in the process of installing additional mounts in other buses. In the event that those buses with body-worn cameras have to go out of service or be repaired, we can add that camera to a different bus more easily to make sure that we have buses in rotation. And Chief Canty can speak about the audit and the evaluative process that we have underway now that we have the 2 body-worn camera and mobile solution, if you'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So what we've instituted is a system that will be conducting weekly audits of all the various cameras. We divide it up into boroughs, so we get the list of where the buses have gone, so that this way we can get a full data collection of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, and activities that are going on in a bus. We're looking for clarity, ease of upload, just a little different nuances between the 2 systems, because ultimately if we're going to procure, we want to make sure that we make the best purchase. With the the body camera mounted in the back of the bus, it's placed strategically, but we want to make sure that we're capturing the same amount of footage. So we started that process about 2 weeks ago. Before we got the Genetec solution, we started doing it with the buses that we had. We started doing the audits on the cameras that we had on the buses, and now we've added the additional, so we have 14. And now in the Genetec, once we get the solution to the uploading, we'll be doing the uploading also.
And so, just so I understand, thank you, Chief. Just so I understand, we have the body cameras that we've been using since 2017.
Yes.
And then we just got the Genetec solution, and what you're asking for is 6 months to then use to evaluate both the Genetec and the body cam. It's not that you're asking 6 months to start the...
No, and correct, Stanley, that's correct. And also the, well, we had installed those body-worn cameras. We actually, since the installation of those in 2017, none of them actually captured any incident, and so that's why we also upped the number of cameras, and we changed the strategy of, like as the chief was describing, buses to make sure buses were in each borough for each transport purpose. And so now we're also adding the comparative technology assessment, but because the body-worn cameras cost about $540 each, the Genetec mobile solution was almost $40,000 to install the cameras on that one bus. So.
So, thank you.
Buses you now have that are used to transport inmates currently, what percentage of those buses would actually have cameras on them right now?
I don't know of the percentage, but it will be 15. So it's 14 right now with the body-worn cameras and 1 bus outfitted with the Genetec mobile solution.
Does anybody know how many buses you have? I'm just curious to know what kind of coverage the whole thing is going to, right now the pilot has.
Well, the amount of buses that are utilized depends on the court date, on the court count for that day.
No, what I'm asking is, of all the buses you have that are used to transport inmates, so you're going to have 15 of them that have cameras, correct, right now?
Yes.
So our 15 is, so it's 15 of how many is what I'm asking?
I would say, I could get you the exact count. I don't want to give you misinformation.
Just roughly.
I would say approximately 200 buses.
200, okay. 7%.
That's why I can't vote for this one. Yeah. We gave you, and I know exactly you do a great job, and I'm not criticizing you, and I know how hard you work, but, this answer to me, we talked about this, and we were going to do it. This is about safety of correctional officers. This is about safety of the people taking the bus. This is about safety. And to me, and we heard the Brooklyn Defenders folks talk about a really sad story there, and to me, this is unacceptable. This is not a hard thing to get accomplished. Every single private car service in New York, and I know it's much more difficult, there has to be cameras in the back and front, and I know that you're working hard and doing a good job, but I can't vote for this one.
Does the department have a view on just kind of generally speaking why it's taking so long? I mean, I think that's what the board members want to hear.
Yeah, unfortunately, the city procurement process was lengthy and then protracted further by the move to the MBWE procurement in, I think, February of this year. I would just point out for context that in fiscal year 18, which would have run July 1 to June 30, we had approximately 50 incidents that occurred on buses or outside of buses in the Sallyport area. And so that, for context, is the number of incidents that on an annual basis we've seen. And so while I don't disagree with Mr. Reagan's expression of the importance of safety, I would say that, I hope that those numbers also put it in scope with respect to the department's evaluation of the relative technology versus cost. I think the department has a responsibility to assess. There's value to an integrated system, but on the other hand, we know that the body-worn cameras don't get the same amount of coverage. So.
Could you speak to research that DOC has done regarding how other jurisdictions across the country have addressed the same challenge? I understand that there might be unique challenges associated with outfitting DOC transportation vehicles with full coverage. How have other jurisdictions addressed the same challenge?
I don't presently have available for you any comprehensive, research or assessment of other jurisdictions. I don't have an understanding that transport vehicles are commonly outfitted with video cameras in corrections for jail settings.
I don't have the data, but I think school buses have these things. I think city buses have these things. I think that this is a safety issue that we expected when we passed the last variance. I did, that we were going to come to a point where every bus has to have a camera. And we're now coming back saying, and I'm not criticizing.
I would just note, it was a pilot that was intended to be evaluative, and so I want to take this in steps that this wasn't.
I'm not a procurement person, but the same people that have the cameras in the jails on Rikers Island, those people also make cameras for buses. And you could leverage those contracts, I have to imagine.
That's what the bus we just had returned to us at the end of September is with our same camera provider.
It doesn't seem to be that hard for me.
Should we just take a vote?
I agree with my fellow board member. This is really taking too long, and putting only one Genentech system in as a pilot project with multiple hundreds of buses does not seem like the way to design a pilot project. You know that the body cameras are not the way that you want to go. I mean, I guess you're asking us to say it's hard for us to say it's okay because I don't think it's okay. So I just want to make that.
I think when one bus outfitted costs nearly $40,000, I think that the city, the capital procurement that would be necessary in order to outfit every transportation bus certainly warrants the department testing the technology and evaluating it before we undertake that sizable purchase.
We can get, the ones that cost less than $1,000 and smack them in all the buses while you're evaluating the future of it. It just seems intuitive that it's a safety issue. It's a really big safety issue, and it's good for everyone. Cameras cause good behavior sometimes. Cameras cause less bad behavior, and I just think that there's alternatives that could be considered here.
So we have a motion but no second. Where we stand with that? Is there a second? If there's no second, we can't have a vote, which means it fails. I think that's the answer. Thank you. So the next item is we'll have a department update on Raise the Age. As of October 1st, 2018, there were no adolescents on Rikers Island. This is a historic and long overdue achievement. Since as early as 1971, the Board of Correction has published reports detailing the conditions for treatment of adolescents on Rikers Island. We applaud the city's move of the 16 and 17 year olds off of Rikers. The 61% decrease in adolescents in custody over the last 5 years, and we thank all the uniform and non-uniform staff at ACS, the department, the DOE, and MOCJ, and the many contract vendors who have worked to make this initiative happen. The board appreciated DOC's and ACS's presentation at our July public meeting. Your presentation and subsequent discussions show that the city has a new vision for how it will treat young people in its custody. We expected challenges along the way as DOC, ACS, and DOE and the healthcare providers learn to work together using these new models and policies, and we hope that the board can be helpful in the city's efforts to make these important improvements for adolescents in detention. From September 27 to September 30th of this year, the department moved all adolescents in custody to Horizon Juvenile Center, a secure detention facility in the Bronx. These first 2 weeks at Horizon have been difficult. This board and our staff have observed DOC, ACS, and DOE, but especially the DOC, working around the clock to solve security and operational problems as they arise. There is, however, urgent work necessary to keep staff and adolescents safe, provide access to minimum standards mandated services, and to fully implement the city's vision for a secure facility that provides individualized and age-appropriate support and programming for adolescents. We've asked the agencies to provide an update today on the opening of this new facility. The board will continue to monitor closely the facility, and we expect the new facility to be a regular agenda item going forward at these meetings. So we will have now an update from the department and from ACS.
Good morning. So as you said, the New York City Department of Correction, in conjunction with ACS, was able to achieve a monumental successful movement of the kids from RNDC to Horizon over the weekend from September 27th to September 30th. The 93 children were moved, 93 kids were moved, 89 boys, 4 girls, and we've been partnering with ACS, and we've been working diligently over the past year and a half to come up with policies and procedures to try to make the move as seamless as possible. The actual initial transition from Rikers to Horizon was extremely successful. However, since the kids have been there, we've been experiencing some challenges that we've been working with ACS in an effort to alleviate and minimize. We've had a lot of assistance from SCOC and OCFS agency. OCFS is an agency that's new to the Department of Correction, and they've been working with us in an effort to help guide us in best practices in regards to dealing with the youth and their behaviors. So today, the count is 92. We had 12 courts. And I can answer any questions that you may have in regards to the facility. We did some security improvements because the move was sort of kind of last minute. SCOC worked with us in order to get the building open, and as we got in the building, we realized that there was some security things that we needed to do. So over the last few days, we've done some things in the classrooms. We've bolted the tables, the desks down. We did some frosting to some windows. We needed to secure the kitchen and the mess hall. We needed to secure the serving line. We're actually in the process of securing the clinic area. We've added additional wall pack lighting for the outside to make sure that the perimeter is secured. We've added some features from Rikers that we found was pretty useful. So we have Visit Express over there to try to expedite the visits for the kids. It's a new experience for them because this is the first time that their visits and their calls have to be vetted. So we work with ACS. They have their visitor list and their call list. We're working on medication. We had some obstacles in regards to getting the kids to the clinic to get their medication. So we started something new. We are going to give them the medication when they're en route to breakfast and dinner, and then we'll get them from the school areas to get their medication for 12 o'clock. We also identified another area to be utilized for outdoor recreation. There's a courtyard, so we added that. While the recreation space is under construction, the youth will utilize that outdoor courtyard for recreation in addition to the patios in their housing areas.
Questions? I think I think we'll hear from ACS first, and then we'll open it all up to questions.
Chief County, thank you. Board of Corrections. I have a testimony which I think I can make available in writing to you guys, but I think it's better for us to spend time talking to you, but I'm going to give you some highlights. First, I'm honored to be here today. As actually, after a long time, more than 100 years, 16 and 17-year-olds are no longer in Rikers Island. Now, any newly arrested 16-year-old will come to Crossroads in Brooklyn. Every 17-year arrested, anyone arrested at the age of 17 will be going to Horizons in the Bronx. As you have heard from Chief Canty, we actually have been working closely together to make the transition successful, which it was, and young people were safely transferred to the facility. The transition has been challenging. ACS and DOC staff are continuously working together, modifying procedures, improving practices, and adding new resources as needed. DOC has been working very hard at preventing and addressing any incidents that arise within the facility. And as we have seen this week, it's always challenging to move youth from one setting to another, particularly the young people that we work that have been with long histories of trauma. I'm going to specifically talk about some of the new recent items that we have actually added based on our first 8 days. We have redeployed 4 ACS program counselors to help with the morning transition, to help motivate youth to attend school. We have improved communication and operational coordination among ACS and DOC staff through roll call meetings and presentations by program staff to familiarize DOC with the role of program counselors. We have staggered our recreational staff so that we have recreation all the way to 9 p.m. We have received approval, as mentioned by Chief Canty, by ACOC and OCFS to make changes in the physical plant structure, particularly in the classroom, cafeteria, and the clinic to enhance safety. We're working to minimize disturbances at night by making sure that we're shutting off the phone system after 9 p.m. Education, we continue to work closely with the Department of Education to create packages and individualized work for those youth that actually cannot make it to the school. And we actually are trying to figure out a way of making some of our program counselors available to support young people while they do individual work. Mental health, we continue to work very closely with our partnership with Bellevue and actually have redeployed some of our psychiatry and psychological resources to fully invest more at Horizons. I'm very glad that actually as of Friday of last week, every young person had an individualized safety plan. This actually includes what are the triggers and protective factors which will be available to the DOC staff to understand how to work individually with each one of them. Family engagement, we continue to work closely with DOC, and as you heard from Chief Canty, trying to expedite the movement of families and visiting. We mentioned and we actually asked to this board previously a waiver in terms of calls, but I'm glad to report that actually we have the automated phone system fully functional at Horizons, and young people can actually call their families or anyone that is vetted within their free time. The law library, we actually continue to work very closely, Friends of Island Academy, to provide a full-time legal coordinator. But actually, I'm glad to report that as of today, we actually have redeployed one of our child-focused attorneys, Elsa Peterson, to be available 20 hours a week at Horizons to support young people in research, print out documents, and even conduct workshops. Phone calls, I mentioned that it's going very well. Our use of dry cells continue to be monitored by DOC and others, and actually the system is working perfectly well. As a conclusion, I mean, it has been a particular challenge 8 days. We are learning how to move in a very small footprint compared to what actually those amount of space they had at DOC. And I think young people are actually going through what mainly in our field call a decompression period, when they have actually been exposed to a new set of rules. I have to commend the Department of Corrections for the last 10 days. Their staff has shown unique constraints and restraint in the use of physical force, and that actually this has been highlighted numerous times by ACOC and OCFS, of actually which if County I and others have reviewed incidents video by video, minute by minute. So welcome your questions.
First of all, I just really want to congratulate you all and commend all the parties that have been involved in this. I know it's, when I was appointed to the board by Mayor Bloomberg in 2013, we had kids 16 and 17 in solitary confinement for months and even a year up to a time. So this is really, really significant reform in a pretty short period of time, and everybody's had to rise to the occasion. We know we have some challenges, and we know that it's going to be difficult right now, but I did want to just commend the work that's been done, the department, to be able to move the kids out on time, comply with the law. So looking at the challenges that we're having right now, what do you actually believe is leading to all the fights among the kids and the assaults on staff, and what is it that you're doing to try to minimize or prevent those? Because there is a deep concern about the kids and all of the officers that are out there without all the tools that they might have if they were at R&DC.
So the increase in fights has to do with the smaller footprint. There's 92 kids. We have 107 beds. So there's not a lot of swing space. And ultimately, you have SRG, you have gang affiliations, you just have new kids coming into housing areas after fights in other housing areas. So it's trying to maximize the minimum amount of space that we have. We've also been looking into incentivizing things. So generally, ACS has a behavioral management system that the kids earn stuff. So we're trying to sort of kind of fast track that a little bit, because you usually have to earn it and it takes a little bit longer. So we're looking at some ways to sort of kind of incentivize it on a shorter period of time. If they're not involved in any incidents, that they can earn something a little bit quicker. The assaults on staff, I think that it's part of the transition back, because a lot of the kids had been in Horizon. So they already knew that some of the tools that we were able to utilize on Rikers Island, we were not going to have. So I just think that it's probably that test in the water period. And so we're working with ACS, with the case managers. We're setting up interventions with their families. We have the ombudsman. He's coming, to have conversations with them. For the serious assaults on staff, we still are affecting arrest, because that doesn't change. We're having the conversations with them about all of the programs that the city is enacting, about the bail reform and the possibility of that their behavior could impact upon their ability to get bailed out. So we're having those discussions. We're doing a little bit of things differently in regards to with our staff, teaching them strategy and techniques when responding, and how to format and come in a little bit differently, because when you're coming from a place where you had a different set of tools, now we have to teach them how to think a little bit more strategic. So we're in the process of doing that. We have some training that's going to take place at Horizon this week with our ESU team. The live time video reviews with OCFS and SCOC that we started immediately after we got there, and we noticed the incidents. Because they've been dealing with this population for a long time, they've been able to impart some things on us that we didn't necessarily know that we had the ability to utilize. So I just want to use one of the terminology. We have room confinement for the kids when they do something, but then for a disturbance, we did not realize that there was a such thing as a room restriction. And that gives us the ability to place the kids who are not necessarily a part of the incident, but just out, you know, in their rooms until we can get the incident under control. So that was one of the tools that they told us about. They sent people down from the other secure facilities to help. So their Commissioner Poole, she's been extremely helpful. The SCOC, Commissioner Riley and Keith Zobel, they've been boots on the ground, just walking us through, because we all understood when we did this move that it wasn't going to be easy, because we're all walking in uncharted territory. And so we're trying to be as mindful as possible. And I gotta commend my staff as an SCOC and OCFS, as they're looking at the videos, they can clearly see that the incidents are transparent, but the staff are not trying to hurt the youth. You know, they're trying to protect the youth in most incidents. And so I just think that the longer you do something, the better you get at it. And we're learning the building still. We're learning the staff there. So we're forging relationships with the program counselors and the case managers and all of the people who have already been at ACS. So like now, we're just all trying to get together so that we can move this dial in a positive direction.
One follow-up, and maybe Franco wants to answer this. How many ACS staff members are actually at Horizons, and what is their roles, and how do they interact with DOC?
I mean, besides leadership, and some of you have met Susan Campos, we have Assistant Commissioner Louis Watts actually on the facility now, who is Assistant Commissioner for Detention Services. We actually have 10 program counselors that we had slated to be part of the, I mean, based on what we have learned from RNDC, they had 8 program counselors that have been instrumental in improving programming in that facility. We actually hired 10 of them for Horizons. And they actually, most of their work actually was slated at the beginning to be after school hours because kids are supposed to be in school. I think what we learned within a couple of days, with advice from Chief Canty and others, is that the morning transition from, wake up to school is challenging. So we have been able to redeploy four of our program counselors from elsewhere to be available in the morning, redirecting, motivating space. We have case managers. We have 4 of them. We're getting 2 more this week that are actually going to be embedded within the living units. These are the folks that actually play an important role in working closely with attorneys, working closely with the families, working closely in setting up the phone calls, making sure letters are coming in and coming out. And we more and more are learning that those kind of things are essential for kids reducing their frustration and anger. We also have a director of recreation. And I think more important, which we are beginning to get a better flow of, is our partnership with contracted organizations. So we have a robust set of programs, around motivational speaking, calisthenics, music recording, Carnegie Hall, and about 12 of those providers actually are beginning to get into the facility. The first few days have been really challenging, and actually the challenge has been how do we get the programs to the kids or how we get the kids to the programs. I think we're beginning to think a little bit different than the way we used to do things at Horizons. So more and more of the activities are actually happening within the living units. Some activities are happening outside the living units. For example, yesterday, we had a good day in terms of being able to, with the support from Chief Canty and Warden Presley, identify which living units were actually able to take advantage of our Dunkin' for Donuts tournament. So actually we carefully review, and we understood that some halls were not ready to take advantage of that tournament, others did. And those kids actually did really well yesterday, and and they had a culinary art class that actually had some snacks with them, and they were very good. I think we're beginning to understand that there's going to be a balance between activities for kids and slowing down the pace for certain group of kids who actually have to be in a more restrictive environment. And I think actually what will happen, I mean, I've seen it before, is that kids are going to hear that if you do well, you will get this other stuff. And that's just beginning to happen.
Yes, I have a quick follow-up on the staffing, Deputy Commissioner Franco. You mentioned that there were 4 case managers on site and 2 new hires on the way. Will that 6 complete the staffing by case manager, or are there additional case managers in the pipeline for?
Well, those 6 will be enough to do what we have to do by the regulations of having case management 7 days a week. But again, the city, the administration, DOC, and ACS is committed to actually invest more resources. We're looking at investing into more case managers.
Sherman, you have another question?
Could you also speak to the procedures for staff at Horizon receiving medical attention when necessary at the facility?
So last week, we had a couple of hiccups in regards to staff receiving medical attention in the facility. So we have a nurse now that's assigned just for staff from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And they do the triage. And if the officer or the staff member needs to be seen by a doctor, we do televideo to a doctor who actually does the follow-up. So we put that in place last week.
And I think that's an important, very quick improvement. I mean, our programs are actually staffed by board-certified pediatricians with adolescent health specialty. They're actually not doctors to serve adults. And we actually got the support from the city and health and hospitals to bring someone that had that expertise.
Okay, so a little emotional right now because a lot of these people that I see getting hurt on television, and unfortunately I'm only privy to, what the media is seeing, is people who work for me and are heroic and are amazing officers, amazing captains, and it seems like they're getting hurt. I don't see any ACS engagement where I thought that the procedure would be DOC would be assisting ACS in this transition. So, Deputy Commissioner, I'll ask you for ACS, what is going to be the ratio for correction officers and ACS? Because I think there is a good plan to transition, but you have 90 individuals that come from Rikers Island, have that mentality, and a lot of people are getting seriously hurt, and it seems like it's just DOC that I see getting seriously hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that actually the Department of Correctional staff have done an amazing job to actually support young people, keep them safe, and actually do their best to maintain the facility safe. The role of ACS has actually always been clear that at the beginning at Horizons was just to provide programmatic support. We have made that clear in statements here and the City Council and elsewhere. We actually are more than willing to work with DOC and others to actually improve and enhance as we did within a few days, and we will continue to do so. But the intent have always been clearly articulated that at the beginning during the transition, when the young people were moving out of Rikers, the day-to-day operations of safety and security on the floor were going to be done by DOC. If we need to step up, we will.
Right, I know there's a lot of things that we've done in RMDC, like, when I suggested when I made the tour, like limit, transportation to the feeding, have in-house feedings, and I was told, we don't do that in ACS. And I understand that, because that's not what it is. But if you throw 90 individuals in one area that we've spent years on controlling the violence and then think that they're going to act differently just because the environment overnight, I mean, that's why you see a lot of our people getting really hurt. And I got to tell you, I watch television. I can't sleep at night, because these are the people who, I grew up with. These are the people who work for me diligently, and these are the people who are jumping in front of individuals swinging and trying to really hurt people, not knowing if they have weapons, but yet heroically they're doing this, you know. And you know, one person asked me, well, before you had chemical agents, you know, what did you do? I was like, well, we were taught when I came on the job, and Chief Cantor, you'll say the same thing. You know, we take a step back, we give direct orders to stop, and then wait till, you know, suited people come in to engage in the violence. And, you know, with the age of chemical agents, we're able to quickly engage. But these officers are getting thrown in the middle and endangering their own lives. And like I said, heroically, I'm proud of every one of them. I recognize most of them. And what are we doing to keep them safe? Because this is really upsetting.
So I want to respond to the comment that the staff members are getting seriously injured. We have had a lot of staff members go to the hospital, and any injury to staff is not a good thing. However, we've had only 2 individuals who sustained serious injuries out of all of those incidents. So, you know, I think that's a blessing. And we're working on strategic responses, and the officers are, their innate response to an incident is to get in the middle to protect the kids. So, you know, we're telling them to use their whistles, and we're throwing out some other things that would, you know, we have to go back to some of the stuff that we historically had in place. So we're in the process of doing that. And we're working with OCFS and SCOC and all of the other outside agencies and entities to ensure that whatever our staff does is in compliance, you know, with what the mandates are. So we recognize that we don't want any of our staff members to get hurt, you know, and so we're assessing and every day trying to come up with new tools that, you know, we can put into Horizon to make it a safer place for the kids and for the uniform staff as well as the non-uniform staff who are in that building.
Because, I mean, if it's not safe, nothing else matters. I'm just saying I saw a picture of an officer with a broken nose before I walk up here. So that's the only thing that I saw when I came up here. And like, you know, and any officer or anybody in general, and even the adolescents, anybody gets hurt, it's really our responsibility to keep everybody safe.
Oh, and also when we are using some in-house feedings, and we slowing up the feedings, and we're breaking up the movement. So, because what we're finding, even with the kids who are living in the housing areas together, they're not acting up in the housing area, but once they get outside together, then they're acting up together. So we decided that we're going to break those numbers down and move them in smaller groups. So this is all lessons learned because, you know, we're just there, and this is us embarking on a new adventure. And so ultimately, you know, we're trying to fast track the learning as much as possible. And that's why we have all of the people from the outside who've done this before, giving us any types of suggestions that they can, so that this way we don't have to always be reactive. We're looking to be as proactive as possible in regards to the safety of our staff as well as the safety of the kids.
Thank you, Chief. And Commissioner, please feel free to answer the question too. Is it time to consider Plan B? You said that this facility is too small and not big enough to handle these children. Also, the way that you speak, you know, you call these kids kids, and they're kids, and it's enlightening to hear that. But is it time to think about Plan B, that the facility is not right for this? Too many correctional officers are getting hurt. And I'm listening to what you're saying about security, and I respect what you're saying about security, but if the facility is not the right facility, we can't shove, you know, the peg into the square thing. And it just seems it's time to consider Plan B. And I don't know what it is, but if these injuries continue, it's unacceptable. And I think it's time to consider other options, including maybe we weren't ready to move yet, as important as the goal was to get there. And I'm listening to you guys, you're working so hard and you're trying to be so creative and trying to do stuff, and I'm concerned that it's going to happen again today. You know, is it time to consider Plan B, Commissioner?
So with regard to timing, there was a state law that was passed. It is our obligation to follow the law. We have to remember that we moved in together the same day the kids moved in. We didn't have opportunity to go in and practice run and dry run every single thing that happens within that facility with ACS or with DOE or with the medical staff. We all moved in together. We also have to remember that these youth, and we all know that brain development, and we talk about it, they're impulsive. They have poor impulse control. Some of them grew up with ACS and have been in Crossroads before, so they know what can and cannot be done inside one of those facilities. They do what teenagers do. They are pushing the limits. They are testing us. We are learning a new way to deal with them. ACS, DOE, medical staff, and DOC are all working together to try to make this a success. We're learning along with them. I've been in the facility. I've talked to staff. I've talked to the youth. We're trying to make it work. No one wants anyone to get hurt, staff or inmates, residents. The Plan B, there's no other location. So the spirit of the law was to move the kids off of Rikers Island. We considered all other possible locations, some of the state facilities, but they were not afforded to us. We thought about our borough facilities, but that would not have spoken to the spirit of the law. Just because the law said to get them off Rikers Island, it did not mean put them on VCBC or in MDC or Brooklyn. It was to be moved into a different type of facility run by different types of rules. The SCOC and OCFS have been very accommodating with us in trying to help us learn a new way. So the Plan B is not to change locations. It's clear we are in that facility. We have to learn a different way of managing. It troubles me every time there's an incident and someone gets hurt, whether it be our staff, ACS staff, or the youth. And we, for example, it has calmed down. The incidents have gone down. Today it's almost noon and we've had no incidents in that facility today. So I think the longer we go, the better we do a communication, the more staff we have come in. 6 months from now, we'll look back on this and go, well, of course we had problems because it was something new. So we are in that facility all day. The chiefs are there, other wardens go and provide support, the union is there. We are doing everything that we possibly can right now, and working with the SCOC and OCFS to make things better.
Commissioner.
And I would just like to acknowledge, I think y'all are, this is a challenging situation. And you, Chief, and you, Felipe, y'all doing the job at hand and staying the course. And I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you, acknowledge it. The question I have for you, Felipe, is y'all are going to hire 600 youth development specialists. What's your plan to integrate them? Is it wait till you hire all 600? At what point will you start integrating them into the operation?
I don't have the timeline with me in front of me, but we actually are finally getting to be able to staff up to meet the raise the age kids. I mean, as I open up, you may remember that actually beginning October 1st, any raise the age kid, any 16-year-old who is arrested in New York City is going to Crossroads. And we actually had under the regulations to develop a co-location plan where actually adolescent offenders cannot be mixed up with juvenile delinquents or juvenile offenders. So we're actually running 2 parallel programs within a very small facility. And that's an important deadline and mandate that the city has to meet. So we're focusing on that. We're actually getting close to being able to do that.
Okay.
We hired the first 175 staff already that actually were needed to do that. And we're soon going to start thinking about, in the next couple of months, working with DOC how to redeploy staff that are YDS at Horizons.
Perfect. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the board? We thank you very much for your report and for all the good work you're doing. The board certainly will support you going forward, however way we can. Dr. Cohen, I think you had a
Sorry, just a brief comment. I really appreciate all the remarks of the commissioners and Commissioner Brand's remarks in particular. There were, the kind of process that you described that should have happened, but I understand why it didn't happen. It would have been helpful, and it means that people are living and some being injured, through this process right now. But I do hope that the trend that you described continues. I believe it will, I've been to the facility a number of times, and I've talked with staff of all the organizations involved, and I unfortunately just had a thought last night that I did not have a chance to share with you, but I am concerned with the size of the facility. I think it is really on the edge. For example, if the police department and the DAs of some borough got together and found some group of 15, 17-year-olds, you'd be overwhelmed, right now. And I actually specifically wonder if it would be possible to move the young women out of Horizon to some other place, opening up another housing area and giving you more flexibility in the work. It really seems tight to me right now. I was in that unit with the young women. I actually got locked inside that unit because there were problem with staff getting keys to get me out. But could they be, with that would give you 10% more capacity in the building, and there are only 4 young women there. Is that right?
3. It's 3 young ladies, and that's an 8-bed unit.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe that's not helpful, but I am concerned, that everyone work together to make sure that the capacity does not, that you're really faced. It's very small right now, and I appreciate the notion of moving people in smaller groups as a way of coping with it, but it is. Having another 8-bedded unit. I know you're using 5-bedded units for things. You're using 8-bedded units for things. You're using 13-bedded units for things. Is that the largest that you have available?
15 bed is the largest.
And having another 8-bed unit, I think, would be helpful. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we turn to the 18 to 21-year-old housing unit variance.
So the board standards require that the department house 18 to 20-year-olds separately and apart to provide age-appropriate programming. However, the department has sought and the board has repeatedly granted a variance on this requirement over the past few years. As of October 1st, the department is housing 36% of 18 to 21-year-olds in young adult housing. This includes 27% of 19 to 21-year-olds and 93% of 18-year-olds. Because the board remains committed to the vision of the young adult plan, the board voted in July to grant only a 3-month variance on this issue instead of the requested 6 months in order to assess the department's progress towards its stated goal to have 60% of young adults housed in young adult housing at RNDC, and to review a new plan to house, quote, substantially all young adults in young adult housing. We received this report ahead of deadline last week. That's on our website, and I'd like to invite the department to come up and present that plan and its request for a variance.
Good morning. My name is Timothy Farrell, Senior Deputy Commissioner. We're here to present a request for a 6-month variance on the commingling for young adults, 19 to 21-year-olds, with adults 22 years and older. Pursuant to Section 1-15 of the New York City Board of Corrections Minimum Standards, the New York City Department of Correction writes to request a 6-month limited variance renewal from BOC Minimum Standards 1-02, which as of October 15, 2018, requires inmates aged 18 to 21 be housed separate and apart from inmates over the age of 21. While the scope of the BOC minimum standards is applicable to young adults ages 18 to 21, the department is seeking this variance apply only for those inmates aged 19 to 21-year-old. This renewal will take effect on October 15, 2018, the date to which the current variance is set to expire. The department remains steadfast in its commitment to the young adults in our custody and maintaining a management approach that addresses the unique needs of the population both during their time in custody through programmatic enhancements and upon their return to the community through the expansion of reentry services. When the department first endeavored several years ago to establish a plan specifically geared for the young adult population, we were deviating from the established punitive management model to one that incentivizes positive behavior with heightened programming and enhanced staffing ratios of trained and dedicated staff. Since that initial unprecedented shift in correctional practices, we have repeatedly assessed, refined, and improved the model based on lessons learned. Through the evolution of the young adult strategy and the development of the young adult specific housing options, it became evident that a dual housing management construct was essential to the safe and comprehensive management approach. Key insight into this vital importance of maintaining the commingled housing option was demonstrated early on through events in June 2016, when the department initiated the plan towards the elimination of commingling young adults with adults and the transfer of over 700 young adults, among which included an exceptionally high number of high-risk young adults, resulting in a pronounced spike in violence. As we move forward with the further improvements to the young adult plan, we must remain cognizant of the serious safety concerns that arose from the past, and failure to heed these lessons of the past has potentially dangerous consequences. It is equally important to acknowledge the effect of commingling young adults, 19 to 21-year-olds, with adults 22 and older, has on the safety and how it has contributed to violence reduction, with particularly meaningful impact on the in-unit violence. Lower proportions of young adults with respect to overall house count demonstrated decreased occurrences of the use of force and fights compared to houses with higher proportions of young adults, especially compared to houses with all young adults. These findings are consistent with the Nunez monitoring team's experience employing a similar housing strategy in other jurisdictions. Additionally, there have been noted decreases in incidents involving young adults 18 to 21 years department-wide. From fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 18, young adult-involved assaults on staff with minor injury is down by 30%. Young adult slashing and stabbing is down by 18%, and young adult assault causing serious injury decreased by 49%. On June 30th, 2018, the department closed the George M. Mochin Detention Center as an important step towards the goals of safer, fairer, smaller initiatives. With that closure, the young adult population from GMDC was rehoused to various facilities department-wide based on housing and programmatic space availability, including both commingled and young adult exclusive housing options. At the July 10, 2018 BOC meeting, the department reported on percentages of young adults housed in the exclusive young adult housing as of July 9th. At that time, we had 684 male young adults and 35 female young adults in custody. 521 of the 684 and 28 of the 35 females were non-special population status, such as mental observation, new admission, protective custody, infirmary, and therefore eligible for general population housing. Of those eligible for GP, 221, 43% of the males and 27 or 96% of the females were in pure young adult housing units. As of October 1st, 2018, we had 664 male young adults and 37 female young adults in custody. Currently, 470 of the 664 and 31 of the 37 females are considered non-special population status and therefore eligible for GP housing. Of those eligible, 242 or 52% of the males and 28 or 90% of the females were in pure young adult housing units. As discussed at the July board, and as we have reaffirmed in writing and in public testimony before City Council, the department remains committed to housing as many young adults as is safe in exclusive young adult housing units, and largely at one facility, RNDC. Following the transfer of the 16 and 17-year-olds to Horizon on October 1st, as part of the Raise the Age initiative, the increase of nearly 10% in the number of male young adults housed in pure young adult units since July BOC meeting demonstrates the department's action towards our stated commitment to increasing young adult exclusive housing options. And now, following Raise the Age, the department is in a position to implement our plan as a more comprehensively set forth in the department's young adult plan update, which was submitted already prior to the October 9th, 2018 deadline, to further increase the number of young adults housed in exclusive units. In addition, when the assignment of young adults to commingled housing units is necessary, the department is making best efforts to prioritize the assignment of young adults to commingled units with a population cap of age 19 to 25-year-old. As the July 10th 2018 meeting, the board indicated that it was seeking to see the department's plan and for the department to define in content of our young adult plan update what it would mean for the DOC to house substantially all young adults in exclusive young adult housing units. The department defines substantially all young adults as those young adults who can safely be housed exclusively with those of the same age group. We have learned from experience and analysis that the exclusive housing of young adults cannot be defined by an arbitrary number, ignorant to the factors that influence safety. Based on our prior experience, we believe substantially all can be quantified as no less than 50% of the GP young adult population, both male and female, at any given time. While the department aspires to the housing of all young adults with their peers, the total young adults that will be housed with their peers must be contingent on security and programming considerations. The department has worked aggressively to minimize the impact that the closure of GMDC had on the young adults, access to age-specific programming, spaces, and opportunities. As young adults were moved into other facilities, constant attention was given to operational and programmatic changes inclusive to infrastructure, resiliency, age-specific housing needs, and enhanced young adult programming spaces available in other facilities. Further, because of the move of the Youthful Offender Programming Unit under the Deputy Commissioner of Inmate Programs and Services in mid-September 2018, the department is confident that there will be increased structure, efficiency, and continuity of program services to the entire population of young adults, whether in exclusive young adult or commingled housing. Addressing the unique programming and housing needs of the young adult population are key factors in the custody management of young adults. The department continually aims to provide programs and services that meet the needs of the population, reduce idle time, promote successful reentry into the community upon discharge. However, the ability to commingle certain young adult populations with adults remains a critical tool in the department's pursuit of the individual housing and programming management in safe facilities. The department is advancing a balanced custody management approach founded upon the understanding that while there are overreaching needs that relate to all young adults, individualized consideration must be made in determining the most appropriate housing option, commingled or young adult exclusive, that best suits each young adult. The 2018 variance was requested for a 6-month period in anticipation of the department's ongoing plan to house young adults in a way that addresses all their needs, not just their age. The variance was granted for a period of 3 months instead. Since March 31st, 2017, the department is advocating for the board to enter into restrictive housing rulemaking, inclusive of the use of commingling. The department continues to urge the board to initiate rulemaking that allows for this custody management option. The department has made a good faith effort to comply with the noted provisions of the minimum standards within the 3-month prescribed in the variance, but we cannot do so at this time as it would undermine the benefits and positive trends in violence reduction that we have seen to date. The department appreciates the board's consideration of the 6-month limited variance renewal, which would allow for the commingling of young adults aged 19 to 21 with adults 22 and older. We look forward to continuing the work together to ensure successful management of the department's young adult population.
Judge Hamill. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you so much. I have some questions. I know you all have heard me say this before, and I have to tell you, I am so baffled. I would just love to get an answer to this. Why was, we had worked so hard, all of us together, to have this young adult plan, and in June of 2016, we had over 70% of the young adults there. And it's true, some high classification inmates were put in there, there were some disruptions, some violence, so I understand the need to make some housing alternatives for certain youth there. But now, we've gone in the exact opposite direction, as according to our staff, and I think the numbers were revealed today, only 27% of 19 to 21-year-olds are in young adult housing specifically. And I know you've said you're trying to minimize the impact of the closure of GMDC on them. But why is it that, GMDC was painstakingly renovated? I know the chief was there, I was there for years. All these spaces were renovated. You have very large classrooms. RNDC has very small classrooms. GMDC, you have really large classrooms. You have a very big, wide wall. RNDC is a very, very small, narrow wall between very small classrooms. I understand we wanted to announce we were closing a jail. But why GMDC, where there really was some success with respect to access to education, access to mental health, access to the programming? And now what we learn, what are the numbers? 67%, 66% of 19 to 21-year-olds, as of August 1st, were housed in jails that didn't even have a school. And by law, it's the law. It's not optional. Up to 20, if a young person doesn't have a diploma and they wish to go to school and they've been incarcerated for 10 days or more, they have a legal right to go to school. But if you have 66% of those young people in facilities that don't have schools, they can't really access their rights. So what's the reason GMDC was chosen to close, especially when you look at the really dilapidated condition of RNDC? It's in the condition of GMDC 3 or 4 years ago.
First, before Heidi answers on that, we are in disagreement on your percentage on what our young adults are housed in pure young adult housing units as of today. As I indicated, it is over 50%. When you filter out those that are in
because you include the 18-year-olds, and with all due respect, I know
we're including the 18-year-olds because they are defined as young adults.
Right, and I know under the federal monitor and the consent judgment, you all are working very hard to comply. So I know the numbers are very, very high for 18-year-olds, but we look at young adults as 18 to 21, so we want the benefit for all of them. And the expression I've heard again and again is that the 19 to 21-year-olds are sort of being thrown under the bus. So it's good that the 18-year-olds are getting all that, but the plan was really for the other young adults. So one, I'd like to know why GMDC was closed, and if there's any chance, since it's sitting idle and RNDC is in very poor condition, whether you couldn't reopen GMDC so you'd have the renovated space, the large school classrooms, the large halls, the enhanced recreation, all the work. I think one of the advocates said multi-million dollars was put in to renovate that space. And now we're going to be set back 6 months or more while RNDC gets up to speed?
Judge Hamill, I just wanted to address the reference to the legal obligation. We understand our legal obligation is to provide educational services for those individuals who voluntarily want to participate. So I just wanted to make that clarification in terms of this discussion.
To answer a couple of your questions or concerns, the RNDC school, the educational complex, is in a better situation than GMDC. It has more classrooms. It's better situated to provide a more formal, traditional educational service to the young adults. We are adding the Peace and Yes Center at RNDC in spaces that will probably be a little bit larger than what they had at GMDC as well. Those are set to be completed in the early part of 2019, somewhere around February on the last update I received from our maintenance unit. As far as educational services, we're well aware of the Hanbury law, which requires DOE services to be provided to those that are 18 to 21. And if any young adult requests DOE services, we work to transfer that individual into either RNDC or at GRVC in units 4A and 4B, where we have a full-time DOE presence to provide those educational services in a classroom setting. So it's not that it's not an automatic where they have to be in a building. We are required to provide that educational service upon request, and we do that.
So I just want to,
Judge Hamilton,
yeah, go ahead, Heidi.
I think that we also have to address the fact that there are structural issues in GMDC that could not be addressed. And that is one of the reasons why we needed to close GMDC, and I can let the Senior Deputy Commissioner talk
Okay, so
further.
let me go back to the educational piece, and first let me use this as an opportunity to thank Martha King and all of our staff. We now have very, very comprehensive reports that help to guide our discussion and our deliberations. According to our staff, there was a survey that was done before the closure of GMDC, and what we learned is that most young adults surveyed, 67%, said they did not have a high school diploma or a GED high school equivalency. Of those respondents, 70% said they completed a request to attend school, and 38% said they had to submit a request for education more than once. However, only half of those kids ever attended school. So I don't question your commitment. What I question is the implementation to really get the young people who are entitled to school according to the law to actually getting them in school. And if the bulk of them are in housing facilities where there is no school, it's not reasonable to conclude that they're going to be able to access it if they request it.
Comments from the board?
I actually have the slide if you could. I just see it very differently than you describe. I don't think that there was a good reason to close down GMDC when there was a functioning program with schools and trained staff that you had put a lot of time and effort into to create a young adult program. I think the notion. I think that what's happened with the closure of GMDC has been both predictable and extremely disturbing. You described that you're currently going to reconstruct the Justice Center in RNDC, and the classrooms are good there. But you know, in the world that we live in, it should have been possible for you to construct those things before moving the kids. If you moved the kids, and I was there a couple of weeks after, you know, you moved them from GMDC to RNDC. All the staff were different. The kids, the programs that had been set up for giving incentives, if you completed certain things that then provided a little more time out at night, were not functioning. The officers were from all over the island and not from there. You could have, and I don't say it would be easy, and I don't know if I could have done it if I was in your position, but you could have rebuilt those things before you moved the kids. You might have had to wait till you moved the 16 and 17-year-olds out, but there was no reason to close down GMDC. And if I can get the second slide, please. I mean, this is what happened. Look at the assaults on staff, and look at all uses of force that occurred in RNDC when you closed down GMDC. Look at the data for July and August, going from 17.5 in April, 17 in May, 12 in June, up to 40 and 59 in July and August. We don't have the September data yet. And uses of force in RNDC, almost doubling. In the after you close down GMDC and move those there. This was not necessary. This was a management failure, and I don't think I think the department should. When it makes plans, carry them out. I will say that the department and the board, I believe, are have a very different understanding of our rule, which said that we think it's a good idea to have a young adult program and to have as many people as possible in that. We do not agree with your consistent statement today, in your report, and in the variance request that 50% is substantially compliant with having almost everybody in young adult programs. We'll work that out, I hope, over the next several months. But we're really looking at things in a very different way. And I think your description, unfortunately, of the programs available for young adults outside of the young adult program don't conflict, don't coincide with the what's on the ground as I understand it. I hope that over the next 3 months we can come to a better and mutual understanding. I do support your combining the 19 and 21-year-olds with under 25, and the city outside of the Department of Correction believes that young adults are people under 25, and the Division of Probation thinks that under 25 is the issue, and the national programs are under 25, as you know, that's how it's defined. So hopefully together we can get towards that. But these numbers were not were not necessary, and there was no need to precipitously move the kids out of GMDC without having the staff in GMDC were trained and were there. I talked to the officers who were there from GRVC, from AMKC, from BCBC, who said they got no training in the young adult program when they were moved to RNDC after you closed down GMDC. So you can just turn this off now. Thanks. Thank you. It's a comment. I mean, you don't have to answer it.
I'll let Deputy Commissioner Tauzik talk about your concerns about the program.
Good morning, Board. I also have Assistant Commissioner Torres with me as well, behind me here. Just for some numbers for you, Judge, and I appreciate your comments. When we started school, we have over 220 that enrolled, young adults that have enrolled. And in RNDC, we have slightly over 150 of that population that are enrolled in school as well. So as you know, that the actual participation numbers will fluctuate based on various issues. Some of that is inner barriers where they'll enroll and not go consistently, whether there's a court date or something like that. And we have education in Rosemary Singer. We also have it in ESH. We have education, classroom experience as well going in GRVC. We also have a small cohort of young adults in NYC, and we've made education available to them as well. So when you further look at the programming menu of commingled and those young adult exclusive areas, there are some variations in terms of what's offered for the young adults, for instance, DBT and some leadership programming stuff. But there's also, when you drill into the programming that is being done in the commingled areas, when you get right down to the roots of the programming, it's much of it is focused on emotional and cognitive tolerance and development. So as we move further along, we're going to be doing more prescriptive, more targeted intervention for those individuals that struggle within a correctional setting. That's going to be offered by correctional counselors as well as program staff from young adults. So I think as we move forward, you'll see that your concerns are being addressed in a programmatic way. AC, would you like to offer anything?
Yeah, Judge Hamel.
Question. I mean, I think we all know, it goes without really saying, although I'll say it, is that correctional education, programming, and recreation has been proven to reduce violence. So there is a relationship between the violence and this programming. It also reduces recidivism and improves long-term outcomes. Now, other correctional systems such as Connecticut prisons and Middlesex County in Massachusetts have embraced the young adult housing model, as New York City has been decreasing its young adult housing. They've been increasing it, and Vera has really led the work in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And I know had a commitment to work with the Department of Correction in your young adult housing. What were Vera's recommendations regarding your young adult plan? I know they've been working with you for a few years now.
We should be getting that final report this year, and we'll be able to read those recommendations and their analysis of what is their review of the young adult program. And once we get that, we'll be able to provide better information.
Okay, what it says in draft form or I mean, we're just kind of curious as to know what.
We should be receiving a draft form, and then the final result will come out at the end of the year.
My understanding is they have meetings with you all and share with you what they recommend you do. They're not just waiting until a final report.
I'll have AC Torres
Is that not
speak
true?
to that.
Hi, Judge Hamill. How are you,
Hi,
ma'am?
good.
Great seeing you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Francis Torres. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Education and Youth Advocacy Services for the Department of Correction. Although the Vera Institute has met with us in the past, they have yet to give us the draft. They have informed us that they plan on doing so in November and to issue their final report to us in December by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
But Judge Hamill, while I have your attention, if I can go back for educational services for a minute,
please
just to give you a breakdown. When it comes to the Department of Education East River Academy, it has been providing educational services at Rikers Island, at EMTC, RNDC, Rosem Singer, NIC, OBCC, and OBCC I need to just establish some clarity. That is ESH, 2 intervals. And as a result of us having to transfer some young adults into GRVC, this specific academic year, the DOE went back into the main school at GRVC. So presently, the DOE provides 2 different educational services, the services at 2 different schools, the main school at GRVC and the school at Secure.
On schools, and somebody mentioned the Young Adult Enhanced Supervision. I know I've been very critical of the Young Adult Enhanced Supervision Unit as it comes to level 1. I do want to report that I was there a few weeks ago. I had a long chat with Deputy Warden Renee. I was very, very impressed with how the unit was running, with the officers, with the young people, the teachers. There were 2 teachers there for the morning as well as the afternoon session that were really engaged in customizing the education to each of the young people. So I was very impressed with all that. Very disappointed with one aspect, and that's that, and the Deputy Warden confirmed this as well as the other officers, is the young people who don't choose to go to school are only being permitted out of their cell for 4 hours a day. That is not the standard. Our standard is 7 hours out of cell every single day. I know you've set up the school in the level 1, and so therefore that's used for school not only for level 1, but also the young people in the other enhanced supervision units. So that is, they're effectively being denied 3 hours of their lockout.
Well, I'm glad that you're mentioning that to me. Right now, Judge Hamill, it had not been brought to my attention. I certainly will go back and look at the DOE, which should be in a better position right now since we have been able to transfer the adolescents to ACS, for us to explore how best to maximize perhaps another housing area at OBCC aligned within ESH to explore how we can solve that.
And my experience working with you, Ms. Torres, is you've always solved the problem, so I'm confident you're going to solve this one as well.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Any more?
Yeah.
Mr. Richards.
Could you just articulate what's your vision? You get this 6-month variance. What will the young adult program look like? What will it look like in 6 months?
Well, as far as the movement plan, it was laid out in the plan that we submitted, but I'll recap that. Since the adolescents have left us, we've opened up or vacated approximately 15 to 20 housing units at RNDC that'll now be able to be used for increasing the young adult populations. We're going to use the month of October to refurbish those areas, improve the electronics in the day rooms for the passive recreation to kind of reduce the idle time, replicate what was at GMDC as far as the FM transmitter TVs, adding the TVs, checking, inspecting, repairing any cell doors to ensure we have appropriate locking devices in these housing units, general painting, cleaning, just making it a lot more presentable. You know what those day rooms look like at RNDC that have been vacated. We want to bring them up to what we saw at GMDC and some of the other restarted units that we put forth throughout the agency. So we're going to use this time to do that. We are then, within the next 2 weeks, we're going to identify one portion of the special population, the PC young adults. We're going to bring them into RNDC and incorporate them into our young adult protective custody units that are currently in place at RNDC. We're going to expand that. And we've probably identified adding 2 additional housing units at RNDC to accept that population. So that will remove a substantial number of young adults, or all the young adults that are currently in Brooklyn in PC status, and the few that may be in AMKC's protective custody units. So that's going to be within the next 2 weeks. Going forward in November, beginning November 1st, once these, I call them renovations, are done in RNDC, abbreviated renovations, we are going to identify and target a cohort of young adults that have indicated DOE services, indicated willing to program and actively engage and participate in organized young adult programming. And then we're going to look at those that are non-problematic or aren't engaging in disruptive behavior or infraction-free. We're going to identify that group, and we feel we're going to kind of work on a 1-to-1 ratio. We've lost about 100 adolescents, went to Horizon. We're going to backfill these housing units with about 100 of that particular cohort of young adults. So that's going to increase the young adults at RNDC alone by 70% or more with the PC and this general population group of inmates coming in.
So what would be the total, what would be the final percentage of young adults in?
Well, let's see, we've had 160,
roughly
60. We'd probably be closer to the 65%.
Okay.
Don't hold me to that.
Okay.
I don't have my calculator out in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
We are then going to, beginning the first of the year, we are going to enact new admission processing for all 19 to 21-year-olds that are coming into the agency, and that'll be centered at RNDC. So that's going to eliminate the new admission population as another special cohort for young adults as far as housing, because they will all be funneled into RNDC. And through attrition and other areas and the buildup of the new admission units at RNDC, that's going to add to the percentage.
Okay.
So this is why it's a 6-month process, because we don't want to pull the trigger. We want to get the staff acclimated to dealing with these changes. It's going to give us the additional time to finalize the renovations to the Yes and Peace Center in the lower dorm of RNDC, the auto shop in that particular area. And that's going to give us time to get that up. It's going to give us the time to make some improvements in the living conditions, okay, and the working conditions for our staff in those housing units. It's going to give us time to increase and finalize. We're working on some contracts to improve the training on staff and expand additional training to our staff. So that's what we're doing this for. We're doing this, we're making it slow, maybe too slow for some, but as we look at it, a slower way to methodically get this done in the safest, most effective manner possible.
Okay. Yeah, I just, yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I think I was going to propose that we close discussion and, yeah, I was going to propose that we, I don't want to stop anyone from, but that we close discussion and that, I'm going to propose an amendment to the variance request that we just do it for 3 months. I understand why you want more time, but I feel since your report to us is such substantial variance from what the board's notion of the young adult project that we really giving you 6 months to carry out a program which is inconsistent with where our rule doesn't make sense. So I think it should be a 3-month variance with a commitment by the board to clarify our understandings of the young adult program over the next 3 months. But it is definitely not, and I've said it before here, but your notion, if you're going ahead saying that 50% is substantially compliant, then we're in different universes, and that's a problem which just has to get worked out. And delaying that discussion for 6 months, I don't think would be appropriate. So I propose an amendment to the variance of a 3-month.
So the point here is that there are a number of people on the board who believe that there needs to be a significant more discussion and collaboration on some of the major policy areas surrounding how we treat the young adults. And once we all come to a common view as best we can on some of those policy things, then I think implementation can then proceed however quickly it can. But I think there are a handful of significant policy concerns that we ought to talk about, we meaning both the board and the DOC together in the next few months, and hopefully we can get on the same page with respect to all of that by January, hopefully even before January, and then implementation can occur after that. So I think that's kind of the thinking behind Dr. Cohen's proposal. So, is there a motion to amend the variance request for 3-month approval for variance with the understanding we just discussed? Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call. Mr. Reagan?
No.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Perino?
Yes.
Richards?
Yes.
Judge Hamel?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. Thank you. The motion carries. I think we are now at public comment. What is that?
We have to vote on the variance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Procedurally, what do we do now?
So now we'll just go a motion for the variance with 3 months and one existing condition, which is what.
Oh, okay. We have to go back to the original variance, so we're going to vote on that with the one change to 3 months and the existing condition.
Which is a report condition.
Yes. So,
Go ahead.
second.
Is there a second? I'll do another. Mr. Reagan, are you with us here? Okay. Sherman?
Yes.
Perino?
Yes.
Richards?
Yes.
Judge Hamel?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. Thank you.
Just continue.
So now we're at public comment period, is that correct?
Yes.
The keeper of the list is on his way up here. Okay, this is on the public comment period. People, again, 3-minute limit on comments. And our first is Mark Steer.
Good morning, everyone. I wasn't going to rise to speak, but unfortunately, President Hussein was drawn away by an emergent situation at Horizon. And so my notes are a little sketchy. I hope the presentation, I'm not giving any dark marks on. I'm happy to see you all here, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak publicly. Yesterday, I did send the board, executive director, and some board members, I don't have everyone's email address when I'm not at work, an inquiry, and I hope to follow up on that with you all, not in this forum, but it does concern some pretty concerning truth-telling, transparency, and reporting from the department out. To answer a question that was asked, but Mr. Franco, Deputy Director, I think, Philippe Franco didn't have his numbers in front of him. I've been sitting across the table from him for months. No YDS workers will be made available, although 180 have been hired and trained, until sometime next year, spring. So that's what we've been told. I'm sure the board can get a more detailed answer from that agency if it wants, but I'm afraid a lot of inconsistencies exist between the OCFS certification application and the way things are running only 8-10 days in at Horizon. In the true unit, which is, as you know, a high classification unit for troublesome kids, young people who are in the system, they're the most violent, and a lot of the violence that's attributable to what's been happening at Horizon is attributable to the people in that unit. There should be a higher table of organization, higher count of correction officers in that space. By not naming it what it is, which is a true unit, maybe the department thinks it can get away with only housing these difficult inmates with fewer pairs of eyes on them. It's also not direct supervision housing, as that term is understood. In other words, there are lots of nooks and crannies and corners. I advise the board to walk through and see what Bobby Cohen, who I saw last week in our workplace violence walkthrough, saw, which is these are cramped quarters. These there are cells that are down. The count is not 107 beds. You know, I was asked, they mistook me for a Board of Correction member. I was asked for meals, programs, and meds by the folks, the kids there. And they weren't getting, I understand wrinkles, but they weren't getting programs because there were no ACS staff there. And Bobby Cohen, again, is a witness. We still have litigation pending, so I feel like I'm in the Monty Python movie in the, I'm not dead yet. I invite you all to take a look at that litigation. It has all the documentation about the inconsistencies that might help you understand what the position of COBA really is. It's not to not have these kids in Horizon, but it's to get them the kind of things they need. They're not getting. If I'm asked for meals, they're not getting what they need. And again, I thank you very much for your time, and I apologize for my disjointed presentation. Thank you very much. Any questions, by the way?
Thank you.
No?
Thank you. Appreciate it. The next speaker is Al Craig.
How you doing? I know I said I wasn't coming here, but they made me come. First, Horizon. Listen, President Hussein asked me to ask you what your public statement is, being that you haven't given one about Horizon. So that's out the way. And we would appreciate some kind of public statement from you, because we getting our asses kicked, and it's ridiculous. You heard the chief say a little while ago, we don't have all our tools to protect ourselves. One of the tools is chemical agent. You know, what they're doing is these holds or whatever that they've taught these officers, they're grabbing them, and when they're holding them, they're being jumped by other inmates. So we could stop that. Another question you asked is why GMDC was closed. Simple. They were mandated to. You got this Close Rikers Island movement. They wanted to rush and close the jail to appease the advocacy groups who were saying, when are you going to make this happen? So they closed it. It didn't make any sense. And your numbers bear it out when you talk about how the violence went up. They don't care about violence, to be quite frank. And to show you how much they don't, they're housing people according to gang affiliation, right? So which makes it unsafe. That's why you see these officers get hurt on Rikers Island. The classification system that they have is out of whack. It makes no sense. You go to housing area, you got blood houses, you got Crip houses, you got Trinitarian houses, and he knows this, Mr. Farrell. He knows that's what they're doing. And the reality is officers are not being safe there. That's why they're getting their tails kicked. That's why they're getting spit upon. That's why they're getting beaten. Because truthfully, he's handcuffing the security chief. To be quite honest with you, that was a position that the security chief used to have so she could evaluate where an inmate could go and where he can't go. This guy is not taking that seriously. What he's doing is coming up here every month and he's talking trash, because that's what it is. It's pure trash, and people are getting hurt, right? And he knows that GMDC is closed because they're on the fast track to closing it, and they don't care who gets hurt. That's the reality. You want to know? That's the truth. And in reference to Horizon, something has to be done with this. I mean, like, nobody wants young people locked up at all. But the reality is that people commit crimes that make them locked up. Get them locked up. And when they get locked up, there's certain things that should be mandatory. And that's that you conduct yourself in a certain manner. To assault staff, we're talking about 50 officers since they've been there, is ridiculous, no matter whether the injuries are serious or not. But I'm going to say this, and then I'll get off. Listen, a lot of these things that I've been talking about for the last 3 years I've come up here are happening. You have an obligation to do something. I've only had one issue, and that's safety. That's it. Every time I come up here, it's only about safety. It's not about no programs or who getting services, anything. It's about safety. And finally, some people, Ms. Sherman, I think her name is, has some concern, and I know you have voiced concern, and surprisingly, even Mr. Cohen has voiced some concern about safety. That's how ridiculous it is. But if you want to stop Rikers Island being the biggest gang recruitment center there is with this housing thing, housing them by gang affiliation. Think about it for 1 second. You put 5, 10, 15 bloods in a house, you throw an inmate in there, you throw a few more inmates in there, and what happened? They form a gang. Either they're going to join the gang or they're going to form another gang. That's what's happening. And so it becomes impossible for you to enact or control these inmates. And it's because of classification. They're dumping all of these people, hoping that if you put them all together, it won't be any violence. But comes along. It goes like with smuggling drugs. They get drugs, they're all different sets, they're all from different parts of the Brooklyn, New York, Manhattan, whatever the 5 boroughs. That's why you're starting to see it trickle out into the streets. Rikers Island has become a gang recruitment center because of the classification system that this gentleman behind me has enacted. And I'm asking you to investigate it, because what's going to happen is somebody's really going to get killed. If you walk these jails, you got blood houses, Mac Baller houses, Crip houses. You got areas where there's not a black. It's all black inmates. It's all Hispanic inmates. It's all over this place. And if you watch and open your eyes, you'll see it. That's the reason why the violence is out of control. That's the reason why people getting hurt. And I'm going to beg you to do something about it. Stop letting them come up here with this snow job and all these studies and facts and all this crap. It's all to justify their movement. Truthfully, the security chief used to have that area. Therefore, she can keep an eye and monitor the violence and understand how people should be moved. This guy behind me is doing nothing but jamming us up, and he stands up here, and now you see that he's doing it, and they bring a myriad of people up here to follow up and throw it off and pass it off. Meanwhile, people are getting hurt. I want you to really look at it again. You go to Brooklyn House, you go to any of these jails, you'll find that they're housing them according to gang affiliation. Please do something about that before somebody get killed.
Thank you, Mr. Craig.
I don't have a question. I just want to be supportive of your comment. As soon as Elias wrote the letter to the commissioner specifically identifying the problem of creating SRG housing in AMKC, I went to AMKC. I spoke with senior staff. It confirmed what you were saying. I think it's a very serious problem. I've asked the board staff to investigate this, and they are right now. And we don't have a report for you today, but you deserve it. And we will engage this issue. This is something that the department at its highest levels has always said that it is against, but practically it's always happened, as you know, and as I know, in certain facilities more than others. But right now, it appears to be an increasing practice, and I agree that it places your staff at risk of injury, and the board should address it. Thanks.
So the next speaker is Rachel Herzog.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for hearing me. My name is Rachel Herzog. I'm a therapist at the Crime Victims Treatment Center. I'm also here as a representative of the Downstate Coalition for Crime Victims, and I'm here to respond today to the department's response to sexual assault and sexual harassment allegations. A lot of what I'm about to say will echo some of what has been said before, but the victim services community felt it really necessary that our voice be heard in this conversation. As professionals in this field, we're very deeply concerned by the lack of transparency and accountability that's demonstrated in the board's audit report findings. We believe that all individuals who report instances of sexual victimization deserve thorough, transparent, and timely investigations of their complaints and to be treated in a respectful and trauma-informed manner. We also believe that survivors of sexual violence have a right to meaningful access to victim services. This includes the right to have a victim advocate present during forensic examinations and investigative interviews, as well as ongoing confidential emotional support services. These rights are also protected under the federal PREA standards. Unfortunately, the individuals who our agencies serve frequently share with us experiences of reporting to the DOC which are characterized by unresponsiveness, lack of clarity, and disrespect. We're deeply concerned about the department's severe delay in closing investigations and notifying victims, delays which can exacerbate the symptoms of PTSD. We're also troubled by a lack of use of trauma-informed interviewing and investigative practices, which has been mentioned already today. This is demonstrated by the lack of use of confidential interviewing spaces, interviews held by non-specialized staff, as well as the number of cases in which perpetrators and witnesses were not interviewed. The fact that a victim's inability to provide sufficient detail in an initial interview to lead to the substantiation of a complaint is used as justification for further failures to interview perpetrators and witnesses is really deeply disturbing to us, as we can expect that without the use of trauma-informed interviewing practices, very few victims will be able to narrate their experiences fully or reliably. We know that survivors frequently experience disruptions in memory and acute symptoms of hypervigilance and dissociation following an assault. And in order for an investigation to be both effective and reliable, it's important that survivors are treated with respect and compassion throughout the process, and that every aspect of the investigation communicates the message that a survivor will be kept safe from further victimization, and will not experience retaliation for coming forward. We're concerned about the lack of transparency and objectivity. We're particularly also concerned about the dubiously defined category of non-PREA allegations, which is noted in the audit report. We believe this urgently requires further clarification, especially as sexual violence in detention settings can involve complex dynamics of power and control, which may manifest themselves as harassment before leading to a full-on physical assault. On behalf of our field and the survivors we serve, we call on the board to continue to hold the department accountable for these concerns to the fullest extent possible, and thank you for your work in this area.
Thank you. Next speaker is Kayla Simpson.
Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Simpson. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Prisoners' Rights Project. I appreciate your time today. And I want to build off Ms. Herzog's testimony a moment ago. Last week, as you know, our office submitted a letter to the board highlighting some of our deep concerns, not only, of course, about the board's findings, but also particularly about the department's response to the audit report. We appreciate, certainly, today's resolution passed by the board. But we think that we need to hold the department more rigorously accountable. As the resolution shows, the board is well aware of the critical failures in the department's investigation of sexual assault and harassment cases. And what I'd like to do is emphasize the department's inadequate excuses, which we believe frequently amount to victim shaming. One of the most troubling themes in the department's response to the audit, and what their presentation today does not ameliorate, is that over and over again, the department tried to pin failures in investigations on a lack of information from the victim. We didn't interview witnesses or a perpetrator because the victim didn't ID any. It didn't make sense to set up a crime scene because the victim reported it too late. And the theme in all of those excuses is that the victim was not forthcoming, and we hope that that's the last time we hear excuses like this in New York City. The pattern of the department's justification should disturb us for many reasons. Victims of sexual abuse are reluctant to come forward even in the best of situations. And of course, incarceration will never be an ideal setting, but we believe that the department makes it worse than it has to be. Interviewing potential victims in housing area pantries and housing area day rooms are not private locations, they're not confidential locations, they don't meet minimum standards, and we believe that they will not produce reliable and complete information, and as a result, the investigations will be flawed from the beginning. Where the department does have leads to follow, the board saw, of course, in its report that only a startling 26% of cases showed that investigators had reviewed all available evidence. And that is not investigation, that's paperwork. When there are glaring omissions like that in these cases, and then when supervisors sign off on those cases on the same day that investigators sign off on them, we submit that that is not an evidence of supervisory oversight, that supervisors are not reviewing those cases. That's just not enough time. And the department's answer for that is that they don't have one, but that they will retrain their staff. We think that's especially troubling given the fact that they have failed to report to you what their training is. And here's where we hear the most familiar refrain about this entire situation, that the department doesn't have the information and neither does the board because the department is refusing to report to you. When the audit and investigations and the reporting are this incomplete, it's impossible to have confidence in the department's outrageously low rate of substantiations. It's just impossible. So today, we're asking that you hold them accountable because they are failing to hold the perpetrators of sexual assault accountable. And we ask for 3 things. First is to issue notices of violation, which we, I think, submitted to you in our letter. Second is to clearly monitor the department's, closely monitor the department's compliance with the steps of the corrective action plan that you put forth in today's resolution and call out their victim blaming. And third is to conduct another more extensive audit to ensure that the investigations are thorough and they're genuine and that their quality is not sacrificed for speed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Next is Grace Price.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for letting me go last again. Welcome, Ms. Sherman. I haven't had the chance to speak in front of you. I've been coming to these meetings since 2014. My specific valley work is working on prevention of rape and sexual assault. And I commend the board today. I believe it's the first time I've had witness since 2014, since I've been coming to these meetings. I have never seen a variance from the department utterly voted down. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you, each and every one of you. Thank you. I ask that you look at Emily's very thoughtful report about the other PREA items, the other deadlines that have been missed. I think that there are a couple little things missing from that, but not to be persnickety, but the way that I count it, there are over 50 different deadlines that the department has missed. Where are those violations? Who's on the board? Who's running triage to decide when a variance, I beg your pardon, when a violation will be issued for these deadlines that have been missed? You issued one last November against the department for lack of, I forget what it was. I think it had to do with reporting, but we haven't seen any other violations on the PREA rule. I'd really like to see that. I have 2 minutes more, and I'll turn in my very detailed and footnoted testimony, which I again took the time to write, but I wanted to respond to a couple of things that I heard Ms. Townsend say today very quickly. First, I welcome, Ms. Townsend, I welcome your new hires. We still don't know how many people you have exactly running investigations that are specifically devoted to PREA. The last number that we heard, I believe, was 22 in June. Last September, a year ago, you had 12. Mr. Cephas spent a lot of time at that hearing a year ago asking about the staffing plan and what was going on. Do we really only have 22 investigators, only 10 more from last year? I just want to know. I know the City Council asked this as well, and they haven't heard back. We'd like to know. I welcome your new hires. I recognize you. You recognize me. I believe you used to work in the animal abuse unit of the NYPD. Does animal abuse fall under special victims? Okay, so I welcome you. I do remember that you arraigned a friend of mine who was a rape survivor for abusing her dog when she didn't. I know you fall into that all the time. I'm happy to hear that you've done more than animal abuse. I want to specifically talk about the drop in complaints and the department's excuse for the drop in complaints. This is not because it's leveling off. Remember, the department issued a directive in April specifically instructing that the first line investigator for all inmate on inmate and detainee complaints is the captain of the unit. These captains have not been trained in FEDI. I footnoted this specific directive in my testimony. I keep talking about this. I brought this up last April and last May, that a directive has been issued that is completely au revoir against the grain of the PREA rule. So what we're having is perhaps a lot of complaints that would have initially been counted as PREA being discounted and not even risen to the level of DOC, DOI investigations. We also have this other non-PREA bucket. There's a lot of murkiness here with the numbers. I'd like to see some light shed. And finally, and thank you for letting me take 15 more seconds, closing rates. Ms. Townsend, I keep hearing you say that your closing rate is 5.6%, 6%. The way I calculate it is literally 0.0012%. You're literally less than 0.1%. You substantiated in the last 5 years 33 complaints out of a total of 2,788. Someone else do the math. I keep asking for meetings. I keep asking to sit down. I definitely will hopefully begin to work with the new BOC hires, but let's have a sit down. Let's have a meeting. Let's talk about this stuff, because I would really like to see how you're coming up with a 5.6% closing rate. Thank you for your allowances, and thank you again for letting me go last.
Thank you. Actually, there is one more. The last is Mary Lynn Werles.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Lynn Werles of the Prisoners' Rights Project at Legal Aid. My colleagues spoke earlier. I was just going to sound a very note of appreciation and deep concern about one particular issue that came up today in the discussions. And in particular, I appreciate the board and the department's discussion about the education programs left behind at Rikers Island, and somewhat implicitly, and I think the acknowledgement that going forward, we're all going to be needing to look at those at Horizon as well. So we'll be looking in two different directions. My concern, and it's a very discrete point, I simply wanted to bring to the board's attention, is that it sounded as though the board is having this discussion without the benefit of knowing all of what the city is doing with respect to education at Rikers. And in particular, and I say this, we at our office are the plaintiff's counsel in the Hanbury litigation, that the city, while they're here talking about, oh, we understand Hanbury, just be aware and look at the docket that last week the city filed a motion to terminate the Hanbury decree with respect to the kids, the 16 and 17-year-olds, and partially with respect to 18 and 21-year-olds. And I'm not going to talk about the merits of that. We'll discuss that with the court. The city will talk about its view, and the judge will decide. But my concern is when big issues are being talked about here and the board hasn't been given some of the big picture of what the city is doing. And if in one context they're saying one thing, and then if another, they're going into court and trying to terminate relief. And that that's a process that is very swift in prison litigation. It's distressing when you don't have all of the information. If the actors aren't telling it to you, I would encourage perhaps what the board to do, perhaps ask that you get courtesy copies of everything that the city files in Hanbury. I mean, they're on a public docket. We're not talking about anything secret, but you probably have a lot more things to do than go search on Pacer every week to find out if what you're being told publicly is the full story. I'm not saying it's the inaccurate story, but whether it's the full story of what the city is trying to do about a very central public policy issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the public comment period, and I think we are now adjourned. Next meeting is